Welcome, dear listener. Settle yourself gently, wherever you may be, perhaps beneath a warm blanket or beside the quiet glow of a lamp. Take in a slow, deep breath, and then release it, like the soft sigh of wind through tall grass. Around you. Imagine the stillness of a medieval night. Candles flicker on a wooden table. Their golden light trembles against stone walls, casting long shadows that sway like dancers. Outside, you might hear the hush of leaves stirred by an evening breeze, or the muted crackle of a hearth where logs burn low and steady. Allow these sounds, whether real or imagined, to calm your thoughts. Let your body feel heavy, supported, safe. You are drifting now, as though carried along by a gentle river, its waters slow, smooth, and ever so quiet. And as your breathing steadies, we may begin. Transition to storytelling. Our story today begins in the winding alleys and cobbled marketplaces of medieval Europe, where life was guided not only by kings, queens, and the church, but also by a curious collection of laws. Some of these laws were practical, written to keep order in crowded towns and restless villages. Others were whimsical, strange, even a little absurd. Yet each one reflects the world of long ago, a place filled with belief, ritual, and sometimes a touch of superstition. So let us journey there together, not with haste, but slowly, as though walking with a lantern through misty streets. We shall wander from country to country, uncovering peculiar rules once carved into parchment, whispered in courts, or shouted from the town square. Section 1. The world of medieval rules. To live in medieval times was to live under watchful eyes. Every class of society, from peasants tilling the soil, to merchants weighing spices, to lords reclining in stone halls, was bound by customs and restrictions. The world was layered, and laws helped maintain those layers, even in the smallest of details. One of the most fascinating sets of laws were known as sumptuary laws. These dictated what people could and could not wear. In many kingdoms, clothes were not merely a matter of taste. They were a statement of rank, wealth, and obedience. Imagine yourself walking through a bustling market in 14th century England. You might see a man of noble birth clothed in deep crimson velvet, trimmed with fur from a marten or sable. But a poor laborer? He would be forbidden to wear such colors or fabrics. Wool, plain and rough, was his permitted garb. The law was clear. To wear silk or certain shades of purple was to risk punishment, unless you belonged to the upper orders of society. Why? Because these laws guarded against the appearance of equality. The idea that a peasant might dress like a lord was unsettling to the rulers of the day. Clothing was to reflect hierarchy. Always. In Florence, Italy, the rules grew even stricter. Women were forbidden from adorning themselves with too much jewelry or overly extravagant gowns. Gold embroidery, silver threads, or pearls sewn into garments could be seized if a woman's rank did not entitle her to wear them. Yet the irony is gentle and a little amusing. For despite such strictures, people often found clever ways to bend the rules, adding hidden trims, or secretly passing off contraband fabrics. Section 2. Food and drink. Laws beyond clothing, food too was closely regulated. In the medieval world, bread was the staple of life. But even bread had its laws. In 13th century England, the assize of bread and ale set forth strict rules. A baker could not simply sell loaves as he pleased. The weight of bread, was tied directly to the price of grain, measured in careful calculations. If a baker cheated, baking loaves smaller than permitted, he might face harsh penalties. Some were placed in the pillory, locked in wooden boards before the public eye, where townsfolk hurled insults, and sometimes worse, ale too was monitored. In many villages, women known as alewives brewed drink for their neighbors. The law required their ale to be measured for strength and price. If their brew was deemed too weak or too expensive, they could be dragged before officials, and then there were curious rules about fasting. The church decreed many holy days on which meat was forbidden. In England, this led to an odd consequence. People were required by law to eat fish on Fridays and during Lent. So deeply did this practice sink into custom that entire economies grew around fishmongers, rivers, and coastal trade. Imagine, if you will, the salty tang of dried cod, or the oily richness of herring, carried by cart into the heart of medieval towns. Section 3. Laws of animals, but perhaps stranger still were the laws concerning animals. In some cases, animals were treated almost like people. There are recorded instances, both solemn and strange, where pigs, goats, and even insects were brought to trial. Yes, actual trials held in courts with judges presiding. A pig that harmed a child might be dressed in human clothes and formally prosecuted, as though it were a criminal. Witnesses were called, charges read aloud. Sometimes the animal was sentenced to death. Why such measures? To medieval minds, justice had to be seen. If harm was done, someone, or something, must pay. Even the tiniest of creatures could be bound by law. In France, there are accounts of locusts being put on trial for ravaging crops. A priest might be called to speak, commanding the insects to leave fields in peace or face excommunication. These tales, though peculiar, reveal the blend of belief, religion, and law in daily life. The medieval world did not always separate the natural from the supernatural. Instead, it bound them together in ritual and decree. Section 4. Superstitions in Law. And then, there were the laws shaped by fear and superstition. Consider the deep, medieval dread of witchcraft. In many places, laws grew to forbid charms, spells, or even harmless folk remedies. A woman accused of brewing potions might face questioning, her herbs and tools confiscated. Trials by ordeal were sometimes used. When guilt was uncertain, a person might be plunged into water. If they floated, it was taken as a sign of guilt, for the pure water was thought to reject them. If they sank, they were innocent, though often drowned in the process. Such laws seem cruel to modern minds, yet they were born from a world where fear of the unseen was strong and protection of the soul mattered more than the body. Section 5. Closing the first evening path as we drift gently through these strange laws. One thing becomes clear. Medieval Europe was a land of order and ritual, where even the smallest acts, choosing bread or wearing a cloak, could fall under watchful rule. But let us pause here. For like a traveler resting at an inn by the roadside, we too must rest before continuing. The candles in our medieval chamber burn lower, their flames flicker softly, whispering against the night. Outside, the breeze still rustles the leaves, and you, dear listener, may allow your eyes to grow heavy. Knowing that our journey will continue, law by law, story by story. The room is still, wrapped in soft silence. The candles, though shorter now, cast their honeyed glow upon the walls. Outside, a faint mist curls around the corners of ancient stone streets. muffling the world in a hushed embrace. We return gently, as if opening a door into memory. Our footsteps carry us once again into the corridors of medieval law, where rules and rituals shape every detail of daily life. Section 13. Laws of public order, noise, streets, and cleanliness. Medieval towns were vibrant, yet they could also be unruly. And so, the authorities set laws to govern even the smallest disturbances. In London, for example, there were laws forbidding housewives from throwing dirty water out of their windows without first shouting a warning. Picture it: a bucket tipped, a cry of "Gardy-loo," a warning shout in Scotland, meaning beware the water, and the splash of waste into the street below. If no warning was given, and an unfortunate passer-by was struck, the household could be fined. Streets were often filled with mud, refuse, and the leavings of animals. Laws required that townsfolk sweep before their doors, especially before feast days when processions might pass. Failure to keep one's street tidy could bring penalties, reminding each household of its duty to community order. Noise, too, was regulated. Drunken shouting after curfew was forbidden. Playing dice or gambling games in the streets could lead to arrest. Even the ringing of private bells was at times controlled, lest it confuse or compete with the great bells of the church. Thus, the streets, though noisy by day, were bound by order when darkness fell. Section 14. Laws of punishment, the stocks and the pillory. To break the law in medieval Europe was to risk humiliation. Punishment was not always private. It was often public, designed to shame as much as to correct. One of the most common punishments was the stocks. Here, a person's ankles were locked between wooden boards, forcing them to sit in an open square. Passers-by could jeer, laugh, or pelt the wrongdoer with bits of food and mud. The pillory was harsher still. A person's head and hands were secured through holes in a wooden frame, leaving them exposed and helpless. There they stood for hours, sometimes days, enduring the scorn of the town. Imagine the scene: a bustling marketplace, merchants crying out their wares, children running past, and in the center a figure bound, enduring the sharp sting of ridicule. It was not only punishment, but theater, meant to remind all who watched of the cost of disobedience. Some laws even required that the crime be written on a placard and hung about the offender's neck. Thus their shame was not silent, but announced. And yet, in the hush of our telling, we may see not only cruelty, but a world striving, clumsily, harshly, for order. Section 15. Laws of food and banquets. Feasting was central to medieval life. Yet even the banquet table was touched by law. Kings and lords often passed decrees to regulate the size and extravagance of feasts. In England, one law declared that only certain ranks could serve more than a set number of dishes at a meal. A knight might be permitted 3 courses, while a baron could enjoy 5 or more. Why such restrictions? To prevent excessive displays of wealth and to ensure that feasts reflected one's station, but also, perhaps, to remind all who dined that even joy must obey the crown. In some towns, it was illegal to waste food. Bakers who spoiled bread or butchers who let meat rot could be punished severely. The law guarded not only against fraud, but against wastefulness in a world where hunger often lingered near. And yet, in the flicker of torchlight on gilded cups, or the soft laughter of minstrels playing at table, we may imagine that many a feast danced close to the edge of these laws. Section 16, Laws of the Church, Sundays and Holy Days. The Church was the greatest lawmaker of all, and its decrees touched every life. Sundays were sacred. On this day, work was forbidden. To plow, to weave, to trade in the market, all were crimes against the sanctity of the Lord's day. Those who broke this law might be fined or compelled to do penance before their neighbors. Holy days, too, multiplied through the year. Festivals of saints, days of fasting, seasons of Lent and Advent, all imposed restrictions. Meat was forbidden on certain days, as we have seen. Dancing at times was curtailed. Even weddings might be limited, so that joy would not overshadow devotion. Imagine the tolling of church bells across the fields calling villagers to cease their labor, a blacksmith stilling his hammer, a farmer leaving his plow half buried in the soil. All the world pausing, bound not by earthly kings, but by laws said to come from heaven. Section 17. Laws of water and mills water was life in medieval Europe, and laws guarded its use with care. Rivers were precious, not only for drinking but for powering mills. Many towns passed laws forbidding the pollution of streams. Tanneries, dye makers, and butchers were ordered to dispose of their waste far downstream, lest they poison the very water that villagers drank. Mills, too, were tightly regulated. In many places, villagers were required to grind their grain at the Lord's mill and nowhere else. Even if a man built a small hand mill in secret, he risked fines or confiscation. The mill was a symbol of authority, and to bypass it was to defy one's feudal duty. Picture the rhythmic turn of a water wheel, its creaking wooden paddles catching the flow of the river. Grain poured into stone grinders, turning to flour beneath the sound of rushing water. Behind this simple image lay the invisible weight of law. Section 18. Laws of travel and roads travel was not as free as one might imagine. Peasants were often bound to the land of their lords, forbidden to leave without permission. Even merchants, who traveled more freely, had to pay tolls at bridges, gates, and city walls. Some roads had guards who collected fees for safe passage. In forests, bandits were a constant danger, and so rulers imposed laws requiring travelers to move in groups or forbidding journeys after dusk. Imagine walking along a dirt road at twilight, your pack upon your shoulders. The trees crowd close, their branches arching overhead. Ahead lies the toll gate, where an officer waits with ledger and lantern. Only by coin may you pass. Thus the road was not a place of freedom, but a place watched, measured, and priced. Section 19. Laws of weapons and defense weapons, too, were closely governed. In England, the assize of arms required every freeman to keep weapons according to his rank. A knight must have armor, a sword, and a horse, a yeoman, a bow and arrows. Even peasants were required to keep simple arms, such as a knife or spear, for the defense of the realm. At the same time, towns often forbade the carrying of weapons within walls. No man was to walk the market with a drawn sword. Brawls were forbidden, and tournaments, though popular, were sometimes outlawed as too dangerous, too disruptive. Thus, the law both armed and restrained. A man might be compelled to fight for his king, yet punished for carrying steel among his neighbors. Section 20. Closing this chapter in candlelight. The medieval world was a woven net of laws on love, food, streets, water, travel, and arms. Each thread pulled, each knot tied in the effort to bind society together. Some rules brought safety, others confusion or hardship. and many to us now seem curious indeed, like distant echoes of a world that lived by rhythms we can only glimpse. The candle burns lower still, its wax pooling upon the wooden table. The night outside deepens, and you, dear listener, may rest in the knowledge that these tales will continue, carrying us further into the peculiar beauty of medieval order. The embers glow faintly now, red and gold against the dark. Their warmth still lingers in the air, wrapping us like a cloak. Beyond the walls of stone, the medieval town lies quiet, its narrow lanes veiled in mist and moonlight. Once more, we walk, softly through time, guided by the hush of night and the whisper of parchment laws. Our lantern glows steady, casting light upon forgotten rules etched into the life of a world long gone. Section 21. Laws of festivals and merriment. Joy, too, was governed by law. Festivals filled the medieval calendar. Harvest feasts, midsummer, dances, carnival before Lent. Yet even in moments of revelry, officials watched carefully. In some cities it was unlawful to wear masks outside of carnival season. Masks, they feared, might conceal mischief. During feast days, bonfires lit the night, but laws forbade them from being set too near houses or barns, lest joy turned to disaster. And then there were laws that seem almost playful. In certain regions of France, it was forbidden to play ball. Games in the streets, for windows were too easily broken. In England, King Edward III famously banned football altogether in 1363, not because of broken glass, but because he believed young men should practice archery instead. Picture it, a group of youths chasing a leather ball through muddy lanes, only to be scattered by an officer crying that such games were outlawed. Even laughter had to bend beneath the crown's decree. Section 22. Laws of music and performance music drifted through medieval life, from minstrels in great halls to wandering troubadours beneath balconies. But here, too, laws played a part. In London, laws once required musicians to obtain permission before performing in taverns. Wandering players without license could be chased from town. Some towns demanded that only guild-approved musicians could play at weddings or feasts, ensuring both quality and control. Actors, too, were bound by law. Traveling troupes needed patronage from a noble house to avoid suspicion. Without it, they risked being branded as vagabonds. Imagine a troupe of players, arriving at the town gate, their costumes dusty from travel. The guard asks, "Who is your patron?" Without a name to offer, they might be denied entry, their performance silenced before the first line was spoken. Even the joy of song and story moved within the boundaries of law. Section 23. Laws of the body. Bathing and health. The human body itself became subject to law in curious ways. Bathhouses were common in medieval towns, though they carried mixed reputations, part places of cleansing, part places of merriment, sometimes even scandal. Officials often passed laws regulating their operation. Some decrees ordered that men and women bathe separately. Others restricted hours or placed taxes upon those who owned or visited the baths. Health laws also grew in response to plague. During outbreaks of the Black Death, cities imposed quarantines. Strangers were forbidden entry. Ships arriving in Venetian harbors were required to wait 40 days, 40 giorni, from which we take the very word quarantine. In certain towns, laws demanded that infected households mark their doors, so all would know to keep away. Harsh though it seems, it was seen as a shield against unseen sickness. Picture the silence of a quarantined street. Doors barred, shutters closed, the weight of law pressing upon fear itself. Section 24. Laws of women and work medieval women lived, under many laws that shaped their labor and freedom. In some towns, Widows were permitted to take up their husband's trade, but only within the limits set by guilds. A woman might brew ale or weave cloth, yet laws often curtailed her independence. Some cities forbade women from running taverns, while others allowed it but imposed heavier taxes upon them. There were even laws about appearance. In certain places, women accused of loose behavior were forced to wear distinctive clothing, belts, cloaks, or even bells that marked them out. It was a cruel reminder of how law could stigmatize as much as it could protect. Yet in contrast, laws also defended women's property rights in some cases. A dowry, once granted, was protected by law, ensuring a woman's security even if her husband died. So the legal world of women was a patchwork, freedom stitched beside restriction, protection beside punishment. Section 25. Laws of children and apprentices. Even children were not beyond the reach of law. Young boys, bound as apprentices, were tied by contracts that could last 7 years or more. If an apprentice tried to flee, he could be hunted down and returned by law, much like runaway servants. Some towns imposed curfews on children specifically, forbidding them from roaming streets after sunset. In schools, laws required discipline. Teachers were empowered to punish wayward pupils, sometimes with rods or canes, believing that strictness bred virtue. There were even laws about play. In Norwich, England, it was once declared illegal for children to sled down icy streets for fear of accidents. Yet one imagines with a smile that many a child broke this law with glee, sliding through the snow until caught. Thus, even childhood, that fleeting season of freedom, was laced with rules. Section 26. Laws of fire and light fire was both life and danger. We have already spoken of the curfew, the law requiring hearths to be covered at night. But there were other laws, too. In some towns, carrying an open flame through the streets after dark was forbidden, lest a single spark ignite a blaze among wooden homes. Bakers were often required to keep their ovens outside of town walls, or in designated areas to prevent great fires from sweeping through crowded streets. Chimneys were regulated, their construction watched by officials. Imagine the dark streets, lit only by the moon and the stars. A lone lantern swings from the hand of a watchman, its light a tiny island in the vast night. All others are darkened, by law, to keep the town safe from ruin. Section 27. Laws of animals revisited. Cats, dogs, and horses, not only pigs and locusts, faced the long arm of the law. In parts of Europe, cats were at times viewed with suspicion, associated with witchcraft. In certain towns, laws permitted their killing during festivals, believing this would drive away evil. Harsh as it sounds, it reflects the deep mingling of law and superstition. Dogs, too, faced regulation. Large breeds were often restricted, as we saw with hunting laws. In some cities, dogs had to be muzzled or leashed in markets, lest they cause chaos among stalls of meat and cheese. Even horses were governed. In tournaments, rules forbade the use of certain sharp spurs or cruel tricks, aiming to preserve both horse and rider. On roads, laws required travelers to yield space for mounted nobles, ensuring the hierarchy was visible even upon a dusty lane. The animal world, living alongside humanity, was never free from the web of rules. Section 28. Laws of language and oaths. Words themselves were bound by law. In courts, oaths were taken with grave seriousness. To swear falsely was not merely dishonorable. It was a crime, punished by fines or worse. Blasphemy, too, was forbidden. To take the Lord's name in vain could lead to public penance, for words were believed to carry power over soul and society alike. Even everyday speech was regulated. In some towns, shouting insults in public could be treated as a legal offense, especially if one questioned another's honor. To call a man a thief without proof might lead not only to quarrel, but to court. Imagine the hush of a medieval hall, where words spoken aloud might echo into law. In a world without widespread writing, the voice itself was both record and risk. Section 29. Closing this evening's wander. We have wandered tonight through laws of festivals and fire, music and masks, women and children, even words themselves. Each one a small window into a world both strict and strange, where joy was permitted but never free, and even silence carried weight. The embers in our hearth dwindle now to faint red glimmers, warm but weary. The mist outside thickens, cloaking. The town in secrecy. And you, dear listener, may close your eyes once more, resting in the quiet knowledge that we will return, our lantern still burning, our path still long. Welcome back, dear traveler. The fire still glows softly in our imagined hearth, its embers crackling with gentle sighs. The air is warm, calm, and filled with the faint scent of smoke and candle wax. We rise once again, slowly, as though stretching, after a dream, and step further into the winding passageways of medieval law. Lantern in hand, we walk beneath archways of stone, past wooden doors bound with iron, until we find ourselves in a new chapter of curious rules. Section 6. Marriage and Love. Laws to love in medieval Europe was not always simple, for laws often reached into matters of the heart. In some places, the church declared that marriages must be blessed and witnessed. But many couples, especially in the countryside, still practiced what was called a hand-fasting ceremony. Two people would clasp hands, promising themselves to one another without priest or paper. This could be legally binding, but disputes later arose, leaving courts to untangle promises spoken in barns, fields, or quiet corners of villages. There were also laws forbidding unions between close kin. The church extended these prohibitions far, sometimes declaring even distant cousins too close for marriage. Special dispensations had to be sought, and without them, lovers might be forced apart. In England, another curious law once decreed that widows could not marry again without the consent of their feudal lord. Why? Because marriage often brought land with it, and land was power. So, a grieving widow was not simply a woman of sorrow, but also a figure entangled in the web of property and loyalty. Even courtship was touched by law. In certain cities, men were forbidden from serenading beneath windows after dark, for such music was considered disruptive to the peace. Imagine, if you will, the soft pluck of a lute carried away by the night air, yet somewhere nearby, an officer waiting to remind the musician that love, too, must follow rules. Section 7. Curfews and Night Watch. Dusk fell across towns, a different set of laws emerged. The medieval night was not a place of safety. Without street lamps, darkness was thick, and crime or mischief lurked in the shadows. Many cities enforced curfews. Bells would toll at sunset, and townsfolk were expected to be indoors soon after. Those caught wandering without a good reason might be arrested or fined. To guard against fire, another law required that all household hearths be covered at night. A metal cover, called a curfew bell, was placed over flames, smothering them until morning. The very word curfew comes from this, couvre-feu or cover fire. Imagine a medieval town then. The streets falling silent, shutters closed, and the watchman's footsteps echoing against cobbles. He carried a lantern and a staff, muttering prayers or songs to himself. In the stillness of the night, the town slumbered, bound by laws of silence and flame. Section 8. Market and Trade. Laws by day, however, towns awoke to noise and color. Markets were the heartbeat of medieval life, and they, too, were watched carefully by the law. Merchants were forbidden from cheating customers. Weights and measures had to be exact. A crooked scale could lead to punishment as severe as the pillory. Fishmongers could not sell spoiled fish. Butchers could not hide rotting meat beneath fresher cuts. In London, there were rules about the very streets where goods could be sold. Certain markets were restricted to specific products. If you were a baker, you sold only in the baker's market. If you were a cloth merchant, you had your assigned stalls. To wander beyond was to break the law. There were even laws about how loud one might shout. Hawkers calling out their wares were not to disturb the peace with excessive cries. A delicate balance existed between drawing attention and angering officials with too much enthusiasm. And yet, despite the rules, markets brimmed with life. Picture the scents: roasted chestnuts, spices from faraway lands, wool dyed in brilliant colors. Hear the clatter of pots, the bleating of goats, the bargaining voices. All of it, humming beneath the steady gaze of medieval regulation. Section 9. Laws of Clothing, Revisited, Shoes, Hats, and Colors. We touched earlier on the grand rules of fabrics and jewels, but even the smallest detail of dress could be shaped by law. In 15th century England, a strange law restricted the length of the points of shoes. These pointed shoes, called poulaines, could extend several inches beyond the toes, curving upward in extravagant arcs. But officials frowned upon such excess. The common folk were forbidden from shoes too long, leaving only nobles to wear these curious, curling tips. Hats, too, came under scrutiny. In certain regions, peasants were required to wear specific colors on feast days, making them instantly identifiable. The wealthy, of course, enjoyed freedom in their attire. Colors carried meaning. Black was often reserved for nobility or for scholars, its rich dye expensive and difficult to make. Yellow, at times, was forced upon outcast groups, a cruel law meant to separate rather than unite. In each thread of fabric lay not only personal choice, but the weight of law and hierarchy. Section 10. Laws of Animals Revisited, Hunting Rights. Few symbols of power loomed as large as the right to hunt. In many kingdoms, the forests belonged to kings and lords. Ordinary villagers could not hunt deer, boar, or even rabbits in some cases without permission. To take a stag was to steal from the crown. Laws grew harsh. A poacher might face mutilation, losing a hand or even his life, for daring to kill royal game. And yet hunger often drove peasants into the woods where they set traps beneath moonlight, hoping not to be discovered. Even dogs were touched by hunting laws. In some places, commoners were forbidden to own large hounds, lest they use them for illegal hunts. Instead, their dogs were required to have their claws mutilated, a practice called lawing, to render them less effective at chasing deer. Imagine the sorrow of a farmer, his faithful companion hobbled by decree, all because the forest was guarded by ancient, unyielding rules. Section 11. Guild Laws, Masters, Journeymen, and Apprentices. Within towns, trades and crafts were controlled by guilds. These were associations of workers, bakers, weavers, blacksmiths, each with strict laws of membership. To be a master, one had to prove skill by producing a masterpiece. This was not merely a phrase, but an actual work judged by fellow masters. Only when accepted could one open a shop and take apprentices. Journeymen, those who had finished training but not yet gained mastery, traveled from town to town seeking work. Laws often forbade them from setting up businesses of their own, lest they threaten the guild order. Even apprenticeships were tightly bound. A boy, sometimes as young as 12, might be sworn into service for 7 years. Laws prevented him from leaving early, binding him to his master with contracts as firm as chains. These guild laws, though restrictive, created unity. They ensured standards of quality, fairness in prices, and most importantly, a structure to medieval urban life. Section 12. Pausing in the candlelight. And so, dear listener, we see how deeply the laws of medieval Europe touched upon life, love, marriage, markets, clothing, forests, and trades. No corner of daily existence was untouched by rules. Some seem sensible, others strange, even whimsical. Together, they form a picture of a world both familiar and distant, where the balance between order and freedom was written not in gentle suggestion, but in parchment and decree. The candles grow lower again, their flames lean, stretching like tired dancers, before steadying once more. Outside our chamber, the medieval town lies quiet. The curfew bell has long since tolled. The streets are empty, watched by the silent gaze of the night watch. The night is hushed, serene. The air carries the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth, as though rain has passed quietly through the town. Above, the moon drifts among scattered clouds, silvering rooftops and silent towers. In our chamber, the fire has dwindled to ash, but a single candle remains, its golden flame steady, unwavering. And by this gentle light, we continue our journey, unfolding more of the curious rules that shape the rhythm of medieval life. Section 30. Laws of Justice and ordeals. Justice in the medieval world was not always as we know it. When evidence was scarce, when witnesses disagreed, the law sometimes turned to ordeals. The ordeal of fire required the accused to carry a red-hot iron a certain distance or to plunge a hand into boiling water. The wound was then bound and, after 3 days examined, if it healed cleanly, it was taken as a sign of innocence. If not, guilt was proclaimed. The ordeal of water worked differently. The accused was bound and cast into a river or pond. To float was seen as rejection by the pure water, a sign of guilt. To sink was to be innocent, though often at the cost of drowning. Though grim to us now, these ordeals were rooted in faith. It was believed that God himself would reveal truth through the elements. Picture the silent crowd gathered at the riverbank, torches flickering on the water's surface. The hush of breath, the ripple of waves, as judgment was left to heaven. By the 13th century, such ordeals began to fade, replaced by jury trials. Yet their echo lingers, reminding us how deeply law and faith were entwined. Section 31. Laws of Sanctuary. In a world where justice could be harsh, there was also mercy, found within the walls of the church. The law of sanctuary declared that a fugitive, if he reached holy ground, could not be seized. Church doors stood open, and once inside, the accused was safe for a set number of days, often 40. During this time, the fugitive might confess, seek pardon, or arrange exile. Many chose to leave the kingdom altogether, walking barefoot to the coast escorted by officials and boarding ships into permanent banishment. Imagine the heavy tread of feet along a muddy road, the accused clothed in plain robes, clutching a wooden cross as symbol of protection. The villagers watch silently as he passes, knowing he will not return. Sanctuary was both shield and exile, mercy and farewell. Section 32. Laws of hospitality. Hospitality was more than kindness. It was sometimes law. In certain regions, travelers were entitled to lodging, especially pilgrims on sacred journeys. Inns were bound by rules. They must provide fair prices, honest measures of ale, and beds not infested with vermin. If a guest was found dead in an inn, suspicion fell heavily upon the host, and laws demanded full inquiry. The safety of travelers was seen as a sacred duty. Some lords required villagers to host passing soldiers or officials, offering them food and lodging whether they wished or not. It was called billeting, and though burdensome, it was the law. Picture a humble cottage, its fire rekindled late at night, bread hastily baked, a straw mattress laid out for a stranger. Hospitality, whether freely given or compelled, was woven into the fabric of medieval law. Section 33. Laws of Trade. Beyond borders, trade did not stop at city gates. Across Europe, goods flowed, wine from France, wool from England, spices from the East. And with trade came law. Merchants often carried safe conducts, documents guaranteeing their protection along roads. To harm a merchant who bore such a paper was a serious crime. Fairs, too, were regulated. The great champagne fairs of France had their own set of rules, agreed upon by merchants and lords alike, ensuring fair weights, honest contracts, and swift justice for disputes. Even currency was watched. Laws forbade clipping coins, shaving, the edges of silver pennies to steal precious metal. Punishments for coin fraud were severe, for it struck at the heart of trust in trade. Imagine the jingle of coins in a pouch, the careful weighing of gold scales, the murmur of merchants bargaining beneath bright awnings. Behind every exchange stood the invisible hand of law. Section 34. Laws of Nobility and Heraldry. The noble classes lived under their own peculiar laws. Heraldry, the display of coats of arms, was strictly regulated. Only certain families could bear specific designs, and to usurp another's arms was to invite legal dispute. The colors and symbols upon a shield were more than decoration. They were identity, honor, and inheritance. Tournaments, too, were governed by rules. Knights had to prove noble birth to compete. Illegal tournaments, fought without permission of king or lord, were forbidden, as they stirred disorder and risked rebellion. There were also laws of inheritance. Land, titles, and castles could not simply be divided at will. Primogeniture, passing to the eldest son, was enforced, ensuring estates remained whole. Daughters, unless specifically granted rights, might be set aside. Thus, even among lords, law guided the hand of fate. Section 35. Laws of Crime and Blood. Viewed in early medieval times, disputes between families often led to blood feuds. Cycles of vengeance passed from father to son. To break this chain, laws introduced the concept of vergild, a man price. If one man killed another, he could pay compensation to the victim's family. The amount varied with the victim's rank. A noble's life valued far higher than a serf's. If vergild was accepted, the feud ended. If refused, violence might continue. Over time, kings replaced such customs with stronger royal justice, forbidding private revenge. Yet the memory of vergild lingers, an echo of an age when even life itself had a price inscribed in law. Section 36. Laws of Magic and Superstition. We return now to the shadows, where law met fear. Superstition was never far from medieval life. Laws sometimes forbade charms, divination, or the brewing of potions. Fortune-tellers could be punished, accused of leading souls astray. Astrology, however, sat in a curious place, sometimes banned, sometimes embraced by kings who sought guidance in the stars. The line between forbidden magic and accepted science was thin, shifting with rulers and times. In some villages, it was illegal to leave offerings at sacred springs or old trees, remnants of pagan custom. Such acts, though harmless, were branded unlawful superstitions. Imagine the hush of a forest glade where someone leaves a garland of flowers at a well. By day, it seems simple devotion. By law, it might be forbidden ritual. Thus, even belief itself was watched and bound. Section 37. Laws of Death and Burial. Even in death, the law held sway. Cemeteries belonged to the church, and burial within them was a right that could be denied. Those who died excommunicated or accused of grave crimes might be buried outside consecrated ground, denied the peace of holy earth. Laws also governed inheritance at death. A man could not always will his goods as he pleased. Portions were reserved by law for widow and children. Only the remainder could be freely given away. Suicides, seen as sinful, faced harsh treatment. Their property might be seized by the crown, and their bodies denied Christian burial. Picture a quiet graveyard at dusk, stone crosses leaning among tall grass, the toll of a bell echoing through the mist. Even here, where all must rest, law whispered its commands. Section 38. Closing the fifth evening path tonight. We have wandered through ordeals and sanctuary, hospitality and heraldry, crime and burial. Each law, strange or solemn, reflects a world where order was fragile, and rules were woven tightly around every life. The candle beside us grows shorter, its light soft and golden, trembling gently in the draught. The town outside slumbers still, its streets empty, its watchmen weary. And you, dear listener, may allow your thoughts to drift like smoke, carrying with them the echoes of medieval voices, decrees, and dreams. The night stretches on, calm and endless. A faint breeze curls through narrow alleys, carrying the scent of damp stone and fading hearth smoke. In our chamber, the last candle flickers, its light a small star in the darkness. And by this quiet flame, we continue, each step into the strange world of medieval law like a dream, half remembered, half imagined. Section 39. Laws of Trade, Guild Colors and Badges. We spoke earlier of guilds and their control over trades, but guilds did more than guard their crafts. They shaped identity itself. Many towns required guild members to wear specific badges or colors during festivals and processions. Bakers might carry loaves of bread upon poles, while butchers paraded with garlands of meat. These displays were joyous, but also law-bound. The guilds were so powerful that laws forbade unlicensed workers from practicing their trades. To set up a forge without guild permission could mean confiscation of tools, fines, even banishment. Imagine the sight of a medieval street fair, cloth merchants in bright tunics, goldsmiths bearing polished cups, each guild marked by symbols and banners. Behind the music and merriment lay the firm hand of regulation, ensuring order even in celebration. Section 40. Laws of bells and time itself was measured by law. Church bells tolled not only for prayer, but for labor and rest. In many towns, laws required work to begin at the morning bell and end at the evening toll. To continue hammering, weaving, or selling after hours was an offense, disrupting the ordained rhythm of community life. Bells also signaled curfews, markets, and emergencies. It was unlawful to ring them without cause. A false alarm, such as ringing to mimic fire or invasion, was punished severely, for bells were the voice of the town. Picture a medieval morning. The great bell tolls echoing across fields and rooftops. Farmers take up their plows, smiths their hammers, women their looms. When the evening bell rings, tools are laid aside, and silence falls once more. Time, like life, was held in the hands of law. Section 41. Laws of wine and alehouses. Alehouses were the heart of community life. They were places of laughter, song, and sometimes trouble, and so they were heavily regulated. In England, ale tasters were appointed by law. Their duty was to sample each brew in town, ensuring it was strong enough, pure enough, and sold at the correct price. If an alewife sold weak or overpriced drink, she might be fined or set in the pillory with a tankard around her neck as mockery. Wine, too, was governed. Imported from France, Spain, or Italy, it was expensive, and laws often controlled its price to prevent cheating. Some cities forbade taverns from diluting wine with water, a common deceit. Imagine the murmur of voices in a timbered tavern, the glow of lanterns upon oak beams, the clink of cups on wooden tables. Yet in the corner sits the ale taster, solemnly sipping, parchment in hand, ensuring merriment remains lawful. Section 42. Laws of healing and physicians. The art of healing was never free of oversight. Physicians and surgeons were sometimes required by law to hold licenses, granted by universities or church authorities. Without such approval, a healer might be branded a fraud. Barber surgeons, who cut hair and also performed bloodletting, were particularly watched, for their tools could heal or harm. Midwives, too, were regulated in certain towns. Some were licensed by bishops, sworn to practice faithfully and to report cases of suspected witchcraft or heresy. And yet folk healers and wise women thrived outside these rules, though often at risk. A woman who gathered herbs in the woods might heal many, but if accused of sorcery, law could turn against her. Picture a dim chamber lit by a single candle, jars of herbs upon shelves, the scent of rosemary and sage, a physician or midwife bending over a patient. Behind the quiet act of healing lies the weight of written law, always watching. Section 43. Laws of beggars and the poor. Poverty was widespread, and laws sought, sometimes harshly, to control it. In many cities, beggars were required to obtain a license. Without one, they could be driven away or punished. Licensed beggars were permitted to ask for alms only in certain areas. Some towns distinguished between the deserving poor, the sick, the aged, the crippled, and the undeserving, who were deemed idle or dishonest. Monasteries were expected by law and tradition to give alms, but secular laws often tried to limit begging in marketplaces and churchyards, where it might disrupt trade or worship. Imagine a cold morning, frost. Upon cobbles, a beggar's hand outstretched at the church gate. Coins drop softly into the palm, but only if law allows him to stand there at all. The poor were never free, even in their need. Section 44. Laws of clothing again. The fur and the feather sumptuary laws, we remember, dictated clothing by class. But their details grew stranger still. In some places it was forbidden for commoners to wear ermine fur, reserved for royalty. Peasants could wear sheepskin but not sable or mink. Even feathers were restricted. Certain bright plumes, peacock, swan, or ostrich, were reserved for the hats of the wealthy. To wear such as a laborer might invite fine or confiscation, and so clothing was more than warmth. It was a visible script of obedience. A cloak, a sleeve, a feather, all whispered one's place in the social order. Picture a festival day. Nobles in brilliant silks, peasants in rough wool. Between them, the bright gleam of fur and feather speaks louder than words, proclaiming law upon the very fabric of life. Section 45. Laws of animals once more. Beasts of burden. We spoke of trials. For pigs and restrictions on hunting dogs. But even humble beasts of burden fell under law. Horses and oxen used for plowing were protected in some regions. To steal or harm them was punished severely, for they were lifelines of survival. Mules and donkeys were taxed in certain towns, for their labor in carrying goods gave value to markets. There were even laws about who could ride a horse. In some places, peasants were forbidden to ride in saddles lest they appear too noble. They were to ride bareback, while lords claimed the right to saddles of leather and ornament. Imagine a dusty road at dawn, a farmer walking beside his ox, slow and steady. Behind him rides a knight in full harness, saddle gleaming. One walks, one rides, but both are bound by law, their stations set in leather and hoof. Section 46. Laws of silence and speech. Even silence could be commanded. Monasteries lived under strict rules of silence, enforced by law of the cloister. To speak without permission in certain hours was forbidden, punishable by penance. Layfolk, too, faced speech laws. In courts, silence was required when judges or lords spoke. To interrupt was contempt. In towns, street criers were licensed by law to make announcements. No one else might cry news aloud in public without punishment, for words in the street were considered dangerous if uncontrolled. Picture the echo of a bell, followed by the voice of a crier. "Hear ye! Hear ye!" The town falls silent, listening, for to speak over him would be to defy not only custom, but law. Section 47. Closing this candlelit chapter. Tonight, we have wandered through laws of guilds and bells, beggars and beasts, feathers and fur, speech and silence. Each one, strange in its way, reveals a world held together by threads of command, by rules written upon every moment of daily life. The candle burns low now, its flame bending, trembling, before lifting again. Outside, the moon has shifted, casting pale silver over rooftops and crooked chimneys. And you, dear listener, may drift with it, slowly, softly, into rest, knowing our story will continue when next the candle is lit. Once more, we return to the hush of medieval night. The fire in the hearth has grown faint, glowing red with quiet embers. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the late hour, its echo soft as mist across the fields. Take a breath with me, deep and slow. The air tastes of wood smoke and damp earth. The stillness embraces you, and with it, the curious whispers of the past draw close again. And so, our journey wanders onward. Section 48. Laws of weddings and marriage. Few things were as carefully governed as marriage. In much of Europe, it was not enough for two people simply to pledge themselves. They required the blessing of the church, and laws ensured this blessing could not be avoided. Consanguinity laws forbade marriage between close relatives, often extending to distant cousins. To wed within these forbidden degrees could mean annulment, shame, and even punishment. Priests were commanded to read aloud the banns of marriage 3 times before a wedding, announcing the union publicly to ensure no secret impediment lurked. Some regions set strict rules about dowries. A bride's family was expected to provide wealth or goods to the groom, and laws sometimes specified the amount or form such payment might take. In certain towns, to marry without proper dowry was unlawful. Imagine a village square, banners swaying gently in the breeze, a priest's voice rising above the crowd to announce the banns, names carried into the air, ensuring all know who may soon be bound together. Love, family, and law intertwined in ways both tender and stern. Section 49. Laws of widows and remarriage. After marriage came widowhood, another state watched closely by law. Widows were often entitled to a portion of their husband's estate called a dower. This was meant to sustain them, yet disputes over dowers filled courts for centuries. In some regions, widows were forbidden to remarry without the consent of their lord or overlord, for marriages shifted property, power, and alliances. And so, a widow's choice of new husband was never wholly her own. Law stood at her door, weighing every decision. Picture her in black garments, seated by a window, light falling dim upon her face. Though free of her first bond, she is still bound, by ink, by parchment, by decree. Section 50. Laws of festivals. And holidays festivals brought joy, yet joy was also bound by law. On Sundays and holy days, laws forbade certain labors. To plow, to weave, or to trade on such days could bring fines. Instead, people were expected to attend Mass, to rest, and to celebrate under the eye of the church. Carnivals, too, were regulated. Though music, masks, and merriment filled the streets, laws limited excess. In some places, masks could only be worn at certain hours, and feasting had boundaries, lest it spill into disorder. Imagine torches blazing in a square, jugglers tossing, their flaming brands, musicians filling the air with song. Yet behind them stands the watchman, ready to silence the music when the lawful hour has passed. Even laughter itself had borders drawn by law. Section 51. Laws of gambling and dice in taverns and inns. The clatter of dice was a common sound, but gambling, too, was curbed by decree. Many towns forbade apprentices, servants, or soldiers from gaming, fearing they would squander wages meant to support households. Laws even banned games on Sundays, lest holy rest be disturbed by dice and cards. Penalties varied, fines, loss of winnings, even imprisonment. In some towns, dice were publicly burned when gaming became too unruly. Picture a wooden table, candlelight, gleaming on polished dice, voices hushed as the pieces tumble. Then the door bursts open, an official entering, seizing the dice, the merriment turning suddenly to silence. Section 52. Laws of inns and travelers. For travelers, inns offered shelter, food, and rest, yet they too were bound by law. Innkeepers were required to keep fair measures of ale and food. They could not overcharge nor water down their drink. In some towns, they were also compelled to keep stables for travelers' horses, insuring beasts, as well as men found lodging. There were laws forbidding innkeepers from harboring criminals or vagabonds. To shelter the lawless could mean losing one's license, or worse. Imagine the creak of a wooden door opening on a stormy night, a weary traveler stepping inside. The innkeeper greets him with a nod, pours a measured cup of ale, and stamps his presence into the ledger. Law keeping watch even as weary heads rest upon straw beds. Section 53. Laws of pilgrimages. Pilgrimages, journeys of faith, were deeply respected, but also regulated. Those who set out upon pilgrimage often carried a license or letter from their priest, confirming their purpose. Without such papers, travelers could be mistaken for wanderers or vagabonds and punished as such. Some rulers passed laws granting pilgrims safe conduct, protecting them on the road. Others taxed them, seizing part of their offerings for the crown. Picture the winding road stretching toward Canterbury, Compostela, or Rome. Pilgrims in rough cloaks carry staffs and shells, their sandals dusty, their voices murmuring prayers. And always, parchment tucked safely within their satchels, proof, in ink, that their journey is lawful. Section 54. Laws of fairs and markets. Markets were the heartbeat of towns, and fairs the grand festivals of trade. Laws carefully shaped both. Weights and measures had to be inspected before each fair. Merchants were forbidden to sell spoiled meat or watered wine. Fraudulent traders could be fined, whipped, or expelled. Foreign merchants were sometimes bound by special laws, forced to sell their wares only in designated places or to pay extra tolls. And there were laws of timing. Markets could open only after the town bell and must close at curfew. To buy or sell in secret outside these hours was unlawful. Picture the clamor of a medieval fair, stalls draped in bright cloth, hawkers calling, children weaving through crowds. And above it all, the solemn presence of a market official, scales in hand, ensuring each coin and measure obeys the written word of law. Section 55. Laws of lanterns and night watch. Night was a dangerous time in medieval towns. To curb crime, many places enforced laws requiring citizens to carry lanterns if they walked after dark. Without one, a traveler could be mistaken for a thief and seized by guards. The night watch, appointed by law, patrolled streets, listening for disturbance. They might stop any stranger, demanding to know their business. To resist them was a serious crime. Imagine narrow lanes, silent beneath the moon, footsteps echoing on cobblestones. A lantern sways in one hand, its light golden against black stone. From the shadows emerges the night watch, their halberds gleaming faintly, their questions soft but stern. Who goes there? By whose leave do you walk? Section 56. Laws of the hearth and fire. Finally, we return to the hearth, the center of medieval life. Fires were both necessity and danger, and towns imposed strict laws upon them. In London, for example, it was ordered that all household fires be extinguished at a certain hour each night. The curfew bell marked the time, and failure to comply risked heavy fines. Chimneys were inspected by officials to ensure they were safe. Thatched roofs were often forbidden near town centers, for fear a single spark might consume entire neighborhoods. Picture the glow of a fire shrinking into ash as the curfew bell tolls. Families sit in darkness, whispering prayers, as outside the town settles into guarded silence. Fire, like all else, bent beneath the rule of law. Section 57, closing this evening's journey. And so, with bells ringing, dice tumbling, pilgrims walking, and fires dimming, we pause once more. The candle beside us burns low, a golden ember against the vastness of night. The hush of medieval streets wraps around us like a cloak woven of silence and memory, settling the atmosphere. The embers glow faintly now, whispering heat into the cool air. Outside, a breeze stirs the branches of an old oak, leaves rustling like gentle waves against a distant shore. A single candle flickers on the table, its light swaying with each sigh of the wind. Take another breath, slow and deep. Allow the weight of your day to fall away. We are here, together, wandering through history as softly as footsteps on moss. And so, our story carries on. Section 58, Laws of Bread and Baker's Bread, the simplest and most essential food, was watched over with extraordinary care. The assize of bread and ale, a law in England from the 13th century onward, fixed the price and weight of bread in proportion to the price of wheat. Bakers could not cheat by making smaller loaves or charging more than was lawful. Punishments for disobedience were memorable. A dishonest baker might be dragged through the streets with his faulty loaves hung about his neck. Others faced fines, or even the pillory, where shame itself became the harshest penalty. Picture a medieval bakery. Warm air rich with the scent of rising dough, baskets filled with round loaves, crust golden under firelight. But in the corner, the scales rest, always ready, always watched. The law, like an unseen guest, lingers in every loaf. Section 59. Laws of ale and taverns ale, the drink of the common folk, was equally bound by regulation. Ale tasters were appointed. In many towns, officials whose duty it was to sample and measure each brewer's product. If the ale was too weak, too sour, or sold at unlawful price, penalties followed swiftly. Inns and taverns were forbidden to serve ale after curfew. No loud songs or dice games were allowed to spill into night. Disorder was the enemy of peace, and laws tightened around it like cords. Imagine the clink of wooden mugs, foam spilling over the brim, voices raised in quiet cheer. Then the door opens, and the ale taster enters, a figure with authority in every sip, whose tongue is sharpened not by drink, but by law. Section 60. Laws of butchers and meat too was surrounded by rules. Butchers were forbidden from selling flesh that was rotten, spoiled, or falsely weighed. Penalties could include fines, loss of license, or destruction of the meat in public markets. In some towns, butchers were even ordered to sell meat only on certain days, to keep supply controlled and fair. In Germany, a butcher who deceived his customers might be tied to a cart and paraded through the streets with the bad meat hung around his neck, a punishment both shaming and unforgettable. Picture the market stalls, their tables crowded with beef, lamb, and pork, smoke rising from hanging cuts in the cool morning air. The law stands silently between butcher and buyer, guarding each bite. Section 61. Laws of fish and fasting fish, unlike meat, had its own special place in law. The church demanded fasting on certain days when meat could not be eaten. On these days, fish became the food of choice. Laws encouraged its sale and consumption, sometimes requiring inns to serve it on Fridays and during Lent. To break the fast by eating meat when forbidden was not only a spiritual failing but sometimes a legal one, drawing fines or penance. Imagine the scent of salted cod, barrels stacked high on a ship's deck, or fresh eels glistening in baskets by the river. The taste of the sea became not merely sustenance, but obedience to faith and law alike. Section 62. Laws of hunting and forests. Forests were places of beauty, danger, and strict decree. Kings and nobles claimed vast forests as their own, declaring them royal forests. Within these lands, laws forbade common folk from hunting deer, boar, or even gathering fallen wood without permission. To kill a royal deer could mean harsh penalties, heavy fines, imprisonment, or mutilation. Even dogs owned by peasants near forests were sometimes required by law to have their claws cut so they could not chase the king's game. Picture the stillness of the woods, shafts of sunlight piercing through branches, the rustle of deer hidden in shadows. Yet silence is broken not by nature, but by law, a whisper reminding all that even the forest floor is guarded by decree. Section 63. Laws of clothing and fur. Beyond silk and velvet, even fur was tightly governed. Ermine and sable, the most luxurious. Furs were reserved for nobility. Commoners could wear only sheepskin or rabbit. To break this rule was to overstep one's place, an offense against the delicate balance of medieval hierarchy. Clergy, too, were watched. In some regions, priests were forbidden from wearing flashy furs, lest their humility be overshadowed by vanity. Imagine the chill of winter, breath white in the air, peasants wrapped in rough wool cloaks, while nobles pass in shimmering robes, lined with fox or mink. Each stitch is not merely fashion, but a symbol of law, sewn into the very fabric of society. Section 64. Laws of bells and sound. Even sound itself was subject to order. Church bells marked time, for prayer, for curfew, for weddings, and for mourning. Laws required towns to obey the rhythm of the bell. To ignore it was to risk fine or suspicion. In some places, only churches or official halls were permitted to ring bells, lest the clamor of too many confuse the people. Unauthorized bells were silenced, their clappers removed by decree. Imagine the solemn toll drifting over rooftops, the air trembling with sound. Each note is more than music. It is command, guiding the life of the town with unseen strings. Section 65. Laws of windows and architecture. Even houses were shaped by law. In crowded medieval towns, building codes dictated where windows might be placed, lest one neighbor overlook another's household. To pierce a wall with unlawful openings was called creating a right of view, something many laws forbade without consent. In some regions, laws required homes near the marketplace to have shutters, so stalls could open directly from their windows onto the street. Architecture bent beneath commerce as well as privacy. Picture crooked timbered houses leaning close together, their upper floors almost touching across a narrow lane. Each window, each beam, each shutter whispers of law, quiet but ever present. Section 66. Laws of candles and light candles, precious in their wax and flame, were also the subject of decree. In certain guilds, chandlers, the makers of candles, were required by law to use only pure wax or specified tallow. To mix in lesser substances was fraud. Churches demanded their own standards. Candles for altars had to be of fine beeswax, untainted by impurities. Even their use was regulated. In some monasteries, the number of candles that might burn at night was fixed, lest extravagance triumph over modesty. Imagine a chamber bathed in the glow of a single candle, shadows stretching like painted murals across the wall. That little flame is not free but bound. Its size, its substance, its place in law all carefully chosen. Section 67. Laws of apprenticeship work and craft lived within rules as well. Apprentices were bound by contracts, often lasting 7 years or more. Laws protected masters, forbidding apprentices from leaving early. Yet apprentices, too, had rights. Masters could be punished if they failed to provide food, clothing, or training. Guilds enforced these laws, ensuring no one could learn a trade without proper service. To be a craftsman was not only skill, but also obedience to years of structured law. Imagine a boy sweeping sawdust from a carpenter's floor, the scent of pine heavy in the air. His hands are young, his tasks humble, yet each nail he drives, and board he planes carries him closer to freedom, a freedom written in law. Section 68. Laws of markets at night markets belonged to daylight. At night, they were forbidden. To trade after sunset was unlawful in many towns. The danger of fraud was greater in darkness, and the watchful eye of officials grew dim. Only with lanterns, and only with license, could business continue. Imagine stalls shrouded in shadow, merchants packing their goods as twilight fades. A hush falls where once there was clamor. The marketplace sleeps, held in the embrace of law until dawn awakens it again. Closing of this evening's passage. So tonight, we have walked through bakeries and taverns, markets and forests, bells and windows, candles and cloaks. Every loaf, every garment, every spark of fire was touched by strange laws, weaving order into daily life. And now, the candle beside us sinks low, the flame bending gently as if to bow. Shadows curl across the walls, and silence settles like a soft blanket. The night deepens still, quiet as a velvet cloak. A cool hush lies across the room, broken only by the faint crackle of ember and the soft hiss of candle wax as it melts, drop by drop. Take another gentle breath. Let the air fill your chest, then leave again in calm release. We are safe. We are quiet. And our story drifts ever onward. Section 69. Laws of pilgrims and travel pilgrimage, journeys to holy shrines and distant cathedrals, was a cornerstone of medieval life. Yet even these sacred voyages had their laws. Some kingdoms granted pilgrims special protections, allowing them to pass through lands safely, free from tolls or certain taxes. A pilgrim's badge, perhaps a scallop shell for Santiago, or a lead token from Canterbury, served almost like a passport, recognized by law and custom alike. But there were rules of conduct, too. A pilgrim who turned the journey into mischief, gambling, or unlawful trade could face penalties. Not all who wore the badge were true seekers of faith, and laws rose to guard against impostors. Imagine a dusty road winding across green hills. Pilgrims walk slowly, cloaks wrapped close, staffs tapping the earth in gentle rhythm. Each step is guided not only by faith, but also by unseen rules written to keep the holy road safe. Section 70. Laws of bridges and tolls. Bridges, narrow lifelines across rivers, were precious and costly. Medieval law often demanded tolls for their crossing. In some places, every cart, horse, or sheep that passed had to pay. To evade such tolls was a punishable offense, sometimes as grave as theft. Yet tolls themselves were not always just. If a lord imposed them without proper royal charter, the toll was deemed illegal, and travelers could protest in court. Picture a stone bridge arching over a swift river, the water foaming white below. At one end, a small hut waits, where a toll keeper sits with his tally board, his ears sharp for coins ringing upon the table. Law, like the bridge itself, connects each side of the river. Section 71. Laws of marriage and consent. Marriage was both holy sacrament and legal contract. Strange laws grew around it. In parts of Europe, marriages could be made binding simply by exchanging words of consent before witnesses, no priest required. Yet such unions, though lawful, often led to disputes. Other laws forbade marriages within certain degrees of kinship, even as distant as seventh cousins, unless a special dispensation was granted by church authority. Dowries and inheritances were tightly controlled. A husband could not squander his wife's dowry, for law protected her portion of wealth, and widows were entitled to a share of property, though lords sometimes sought to bend these laws to their advantage. Imagine a wedding beneath the bell tower, the scent of flowers heavy in the air. Candles glow in the church, vows spoken softly. Behind the tenderness lies a web of rules, threads of law binding hearts as tightly as love itself. Section 72, Laws of Festivals and Feast Days. Festivals filled the medieval year, and with them came rules. Certain feast days forbade labor, requiring rest, worship, and celebration. To work openly on these days could draw fines, for it was seen as disrespect to both law and faith. Markets were often banned during major holy festivals, lest commerce overshadow devotion. Yet fairs tied to saints' days were granted official sanction, bustling with life under the blessing of law. Picture streets strung with banners, music echoing, the smell of roasted meat and spiced wine drifting through the air. Joyful faces gather, yet always with law close at hand, reminding when celebration must pause and when it may begin again. Section 73. Laws of beggars and the poor. Poverty, ever present in medieval towns, did not escape the reach of law. Some cities licensed beggars, granting them permission to ask for alms in specific places. To beg without license could mean punishment, as towns sought to prevent fraud or disorder. In other cases, laws required parishes to care for their own poor, forbidding strangers from seeking charity across boundaries. The responsibility of aid was tightly defined. Imagine the sound of coins falling into a wooden bowl, the shuffle of worn shoes along cobblestones. The poor lift their eyes, hopeful and weary, bound not only by hunger but by rules deciding where and how they might plead for bread. Section 74. Laws of books and learning books, rare and costly, were treasures bound by strict laws. In monasteries, scribes copying manuscripts worked under rules dictating accuracy. To alter or omit words carelessly was seen as grave fault, sometimes punished with fasting or penance. Universities, too, enforced rules. Students could not sell or pawn their books without permission, lest learning itself be squandered. In some regions, even what might be written or read was controlled. Books deemed heretical were forbidden, burned, by decree of both church and crown. Picture a quiet scriptorium, the scratching of quills echoing like whispers. Candles glow upon stretched parchment, each letter a jewel of ink. Law hovers silently in that chamber, protecting every page as though it were a living soul. Section 75. Laws of music and minstrels' music, though fleeting as wind, did not escape. Law minstrels, traveling performers, were sometimes licensed, allowed to sing and play only within certain towns or feasts. Unlicensed performers risked being driven away. In France and England, guilds of musicians formed, enforcing standards of conduct and requiring membership. Even the art of song bent beneath order's hand. Yet some laws also protected musicians, granting them safe passage or payment at fairs. For music, though wandering, was still seen as a craft worth guarding. Picture a lute's soft strum beneath castle walls, voices rising in harmony as stars bloom overhead. The melody drifts free, yet beneath it lies unseen parchment, where law writes who may sing and where. Section 76. Laws of beasts and stray animals, animals without masters, wandering pigs, goats, or dogs, could disrupt village life, and so laws addressed them. Stray swine rooting in fields could be seized by local officials, sometimes sold for the good of the town. Dogs that threatened livestock might be ordered destroyed. In cities, rules often required owners to keep animals tied or marked to prevent theft or mischief. In one curious law of Flanders, a farmer whose ox strayed into another's field was liable not only for damage but also for trespass, as if the beast carried his master's guilt upon its horns. Imagine dawn on a village lane, chickens pecking at dust, pigs grunting in their pens. Yet each squeal, each hoofbeat is watched by law, for even the smallest creature was not beyond its reach. Section 77, Laws of Night, Watches and Lanterns. The night itself belonged to law. In many medieval towns, curfews required people to stay indoors after the evening bell. Night watches patrolled the streets, lanterns in hand, listening for suspicious sounds. Travelers who walked abroad after curfew were required to carry a light, so their presence could be seen and judged lawful. To walk in darkness was to invite suspicion. Picture cobbled streets beneath moonlight, shutters closed tight. The soft glow of lanterns swaying in the hands of guards. Their footsteps echo in steady rhythm, law itself keeping watch until dawn. Section 78. Laws of markets and weights. Honesty in trade was a constant concern. Merchants were bound by law to use official weights and measures, stamped and approved by a authority. False scales were punished harshly, sometimes by destruction of the stall or public shame. In England, trick weights discovered in markets were nailed to the pillory as warning. Imagine a bustling square, merchants calling cloth. Spread wide, spices fragrant in the air. Behind the cheer of commerce, law stands like a silent judge, weighing every grain, every coin. Closing of this evening's passage tonight, we have wandered through pilgrim roads, across bridges, into marriage halls, through festivals and markets, among books and music, beasts and beggars. Each step reveals another strange decree, another quiet thread weaving the fabric of medieval life. The candle flickers low once more, shadows lengthening across the walls. Outside, the stars watch in, silence steady and eternal. The room is quiet once more. The fire has sunk into a gentle glow, its embers pulsing softly like a heartbeat in the dark. The air is warm, the candle flame still steady, its golden light swaying with each faint breath of night. Let yourself sink deeper into calm. Every sound, every image becomes softer, smoother, like water over polished stones. And so, our story continues. Section 79. Laws of bread and baker's bread, the daily food of rich and poor alike, was guarded by strict law. In medieval England, the assize of bread and ale set the official price and weight of loaves. Bakers were required to match their bread size to the cost of grain, adjusting with every season. To cheat the customer by baking a loaf too small was seen as a grave offense. Punishment could be public shame, a baker paraded with faulty loaves tied around his neck, or made to stand in the pillory while crowds jeered. Some towns even had a baker's ducking stool, where dishonest bakers were dipped into water as warning to others. Picture the scent of fresh bread wafting through cobbled streets, ovens glowing in the night. Yet behind the comfort of the loaf lies the firm hand of law, measuring every crumb. Section 80. Laws of Clothing and Sumptuary Decrees. We have touched before on the curious laws of clothing, but let us look closer. Kings and councils often issued sumptuary laws, forbidding people of lower rank from dressing beyond their station. A servant might not wear fur of ermine, for that was reserved to nobility. A merchant's wife might be forbidden certain silks or jewels. The intent was to keep order, ensuring society's ranks were visible at a glance. Yet such laws were often resisted. Wealthy townsfolk, eager to display success, found ways to adorn themselves in finery regardless, weaving new fashions that danced between legality and defiance. Imagine a marketplace, colors bright in the sun, scarlet. Cloaks, golden belts, shining shoes. Each garment whispers not only of taste, but of law, unseen threads stitched into every seam. Section 81. Laws of alehouses and taverns. Alehouses, bustling centers of drink and talk, were tightly watched. The assize of ale declared that ale, like bread, must be sold at fair price, tied to the cost of grain. To water down ale or overcharge for a mug was a punishable fraud. Taverns, too, were regulated. No drinking on Sundays before church, no gambling in corners, no serving of ale after curfew. In some towns, innkeepers were required to offer beds at fixed prices, ensuring travelers were not cheated. To deny a weary pilgrim lodging without cause could even be challenged in law. Picture laughter and music spilling from wooden doors, tankards clinking, firelight flickering across beams. Yet in the rafters, unseen, law listens to every song and every sip. Section 82. Laws of hunting and forests. The green forests of medieval Europe were not free to all. Royal forests, vast and ancient, were protected by special laws. Only kings and their chosen lords could hunt deer or boar within them. To snare a rabbit, to cut wood, even to pick berries in certain woods without leave, could bring harsh penalty. The punishments were striking: the cutting off of hands for poaching, heavy fines or imprisonment. Yet peasants, driven by hunger, often risked it. The forest law was one of the most hated in medieval times. Picture a moonlit glade where a deer steps silently among ferns. In the shadows, a peasant waits, bow in hand, knowing the rustle of his arrow may bring not only food, but the heavy judgment of law. Section 83. Laws of bells and time itself was shaped by law. Church bells marked the rhythm of the day: morning prayers, midday rest, evening curfew. To ring a bell without permission was unlawful, for bells carried authority. They summoned townsfolk, warned of fire, or called men to arms. In some towns, special ordinances required every bell ringer to obey the mayor or church warden. The wrong peal at the wrong time could bring fines, for bells were the voice of order itself. Imagine the echo of a bell rolling across rooftops, slow and solemn, the sound weaving through narrow alleys. Each chime is both music and decree, law, cast into the air. Section 84. Laws of mills and baking rights. Even the grinding of grain was bound to law. Many villages were tied to a lord's mill. Peasants were required to grind their grain there, paying a fee or surrendering a portion of flour. To set up a private hand mill in secret was a crime, punished if discovered. Similarly, some towns restricted who might bake and sell bread, granting monopoly to certain guilds. A woman baking loaves at home for her family was safe, but if she sold them without license, the law could intervene. Picture a great wooden mill wheel turning slowly in a river, water rushing beneath. The air smells of flour, the steady creak of timber like a lullaby. Yet each grain ground is watched by law, ensuring no crumb escapes its grasp. Section 85. Laws of swearing and oaths words. Themselves bore weight under law. To swear falsely in court was perjury, punished harshly. Yet even outside courts, oaths were regulated. Towns sometimes forbade common folk from swearing mighty oaths by God's bones or by the saints, considering such language irreverent. Swearing fealty, too, was a matter of law. A vassal's oath bound him to his lord, and to break it was treason. Picture a crowded hall, candles glowing on wooden beams. A man kneels, hand upon a sacred book, voice low as he swears his vow. Law listens as keenly as God, binding every word to consequence. Section 86. Laws of bells at sea. The sea, too, had its strange laws. Ships carried bells, not for worship, but for order. Bells marked watches through the night, measured shifts of work, and warned other vessels in fog. Maritime laws required their use, for without them, confusion and danger grew. To strike a ship's bell at the wrong time could cause disorder and risk punishment. Even on the vast ocean, law was never absent. It floated with the sailors, as constant as the waves. Picture a dark sea, stars scattered above like silver dust. A bell tolls faintly over the water, guiding tired sailors through the night. Each chime, even upon the endless ocean, speaks with the voice of law. Section 87. Laws of fairs and foreign merchants. Great fairs, where merchants gathered from far and wide, were governed by special charters. Foreign traders were often granted safe conduct, legal protection while they traveled to and from the fair. To harm a foreign merchant was to break the king's peace, but merchants, too, were bound by rules, where they might set their stalls, what prices they might charge, and even how long they might remain before moving on. Picture tents bright with fabrics, voices calling in many tongues, the scent of spices heavy in the air. Gold changes hands beneath the open sky, each bargain sealed beneath the silent eyes of law. Section 88. Laws of doctors and healing medicine, though uncertain in those times, was also regulated. In some cities, physicians and surgeons were required to pass examinations, proving their knowledge of texts and practices. Midwives, too, were often licensed by church authorities, sworn to uphold both health and faith. Unlicensed healers risked punishment, especially if their remedies caused harm. Yet in villages, wise women and herbalists worked quietly outside. The written laws, trusted by neighbors even when forbidden by decree. Picture a quiet chamber, herbs hanging from beams, the air thick with the scent of rosemary and sage. A healer stirs a pot gently, whispering prayers. In the shadows, law hovers uncertain, sometimes protective, sometimes condemning. Closing of this passage, we have wandered tonight through laws of bread, ale, forests, mills, bells, fairs, and healing. Hands. Each rule, each decree, though strange, was woven into the daily fabric of life, shaping the rhythm of meals, trade, worship, and even dreams. The candlelight sinks lower now, shadows deepen like pools upon the walls. Let your breath slow, soft as the embers glow, carrying you gently into stillness. The night is hushed. The air feels softer now, as if the world itself has taken a long, slow breath. The fire has dwindled, but its glow lingers, tiny sparks winking like fireflies among the wood. The candlelight bends gently, painting golden arcs on stone walls. Your body feels heavy, yet comforted. Your mind drifts easily, ready to wander again among the forgotten corridors of history, and so our story flows onward. Section 89. Laws of cats and superstitions. In many medieval towns, cats lived half within the household and half in the wild streets. Their presence was valued for hunting mice, yet shadowed by superstition. At times, laws forbade the harming of cats, especially those belonging to monasteries, where they protected precious manuscripts from gnawing rodents. In other places, suspicion of witchcraft led to darker decrees. Black cats, thought to be companions of witches, might be shunned or even banned from certain religious festivals. Imagine the hush of a cloister, candles flickering upon books of ink and parchment. A sleek cat prowls quietly between benches, eyes gleaming like emeralds. In its silence, it serves both protection and peril, wrapped in the invisible threads of law. Section 90. Laws of dogs and their chains. Dogs, too, carried legal weight. In medieval London, ordinances demanded that large dogs be kept on leashes within the city walls. Unleashed hounds risked fines for their owners, for they might attack livestock or spread fear. In villages near royal forests, Peasants were sometimes ordered to mutilate their dogs, clipping their claws or even removing toes, so they could not chase deer. Such rules, harsh as they sound, were enforced to preserve game for the nobility. Picture: a narrow street at dusk, torches casting shadows upon cobbles. A dog, chained, lies at its master's door, loyal eyes watching the night. Its chain is not only iron, but law, binding beast and man alike. Section 91, laws of markets and weighing scales markets thrummed with life, but behind every coin and measure stood regulation. Weighing scales were inspected regularly by town officials. To tamper with weights, slipping lead into a loaf or shaving a coin, was considered fraud against the whole community. Some laws even required scales to be kept in public places, so every buyer might see fairness done. Punishments for dishonesty were often theatrical. A cheating merchant might be forced to eat the very goods he sold falsely, or paraded with false weights hung around his neck. Picture baskets of apples, cloths bright with dye, stalls heavy with grain. In the center, a great balance hangs steady, gleaming in the sun, a symbol not only of trade, but of law itself. Section 92. Laws of candles and light candles, small as they seem, were bound by law. In some towns, statutes required inns and taverns to keep candles burning late into the night so that travelers might find their way safely. In others, rules limited candle use, especially during times of wax shortage, reserving light for churches and lords' halls. The Guild of Chandlers, candle makers, was often powerful, protecting its rights by law. To sell inferior candles, too soft or too smoky, risked penalty. Picture a dark street, moon hidden behind clouds. In one window, a single flame glows, steady and soft. The flame is not only warmth, it is obligation, its gentle glow backed by decree. Section 93. Laws of marriage and consent marriage, though sacred, was tightly woven with law. The church declared that both bride and groom must give consent, spoken clearly before witnesses. Yet local laws added their own details. Some regions required parental approval, others set fixed ages for betrothal. Dowries and property exchanges were carefully recorded, for disputes over inheritance were frequent, and in certain towns, marriage contracts were read aloud at church doors, so the whole parish might bear witness. Picture a couple standing before a great wooden door, morning light spilling upon their joined hands. The crowd murmurs softly, the priest intones solemn words. Their vows float upward, binding not only their hearts, but their place within the law. Section 94. Laws of shoes and their heels clothing laws touched even the feet. In the late Middle Ages, shoes with long, pointed toes, called poulaines, became fashionable among nobles. Yet ordinances in some towns restricted their length, declaring that commoners might not wear toes beyond a certain span. Excessively long shoes were mocked as vanity and, in some cases, fined by law. Shoemakers' guilds also regulated design and quality, ensuring shoes were sturdy enough to last. To craft shoes of deceitful leather was punishable. Picture a row of boots lined neatly in a market stall, plain, sturdy pairs beside shoes of extravagant length. Each toe, each stitch, not merely fashion, but a silent negotiation with law. Section 95. Laws of pilgrimage and travel. Pilgrims walked across Europe seeking shrines and relics. Laws both protected and restrained them. In many regions, pilgrims wore badges of their destination, shells for Santiago, keys for Rome, so they might prove their purpose. Without such tokens, travelers risked being stopped as vagrants or spies. Safe conduct letters sealed with wax were often required to cross borders. To journey without them was unlawful, even dangerous. Picture a dusty road lined with hedges and birdsong. A pilgrim, cloak faded, walks slowly with staff in hand, a small badge gleaming upon his chest. Each step carries not only faith, but the permission of law. Section 96, Laws of Wells and Water, essential and fragile, was guarded by strict rule. In towns, wells were communal property. Laws forbade polluting them, no washing clothes, no throwing refuse near their edges. To foul a well was to endanger an entire neighborhood, and punishment could be severe. In some places, families took turns drawing water, schedules kept by bell or horn. To take more than one's share was theft against all. Picture a quiet courtyard at dawn. A well stands at the center, stone cool and damp with dew. A bucket creaks as it rises, droplets shining in the light. Each drop, clear and cold, falls under the watchful eye of law. Section 97. Laws of Music and Minstrels. Even the sweet art of music was not free from law. In some towns, minstrels were licensed, permitted to perform only with approval. Wandering musicians, unlicensed, might be turned away or fined. Festivals often had decrees about who could sing where, ensuring no discord arose between guild musicians and strangers. Some kings even kept their own laws for royal musicians, binding them to loyalty and secrecy, for songs could carry messages, even treason. Picture a courtyard filled with lanterns, a minstrel strumming softly upon a lute. Notes rise like stars into the night. Yet behind the melody lies parchment and seal, the invisible chains of law. Section 98. Laws of Colors and Heraldry. Heraldry, the colors and symbols of knights, was a world of rules. Only certain families might bear specific arms, and to display another's crest unlawfully was considered fraud, even a kind of theft. Tournaments, too, had laws, ensuring that knights fought under true banners. Beyond heraldry, colors in clothing could be bound to law. Purple, sacred to emperors, was forbidden to others in some lands. Gold thread embroidery was often limited to the wealthiest ranks. Picture a banner snapping in the wind, scarlet against a blue sky, its symbol bright. It is more than cloth, it is law unfurled, declaring to all who passes beneath. The room grows softer still. Outside, perhaps a faint wind stirs, brushing leaves together like parchment pages whispering secrets. Within, the candle's flame tilts and steadies, a patient companion to our wandering thoughts. You are safe, you are warm, and the night listens kindly, and so let us step once more into the hidden corridors of medieval law. Section 99, Laws of Bells and Silence bells were the heartbeat of a medieval town, yet their ringing was carefully controlled. Church bells signaled hours, prayers, and alarms, but laws often forbade their use at night, unless for fire or invasion. Unauthorized ringing could bring fines, for bells carried both sacred and civic meaning. In monasteries, silence itself was bound by rule. Monks might only speak at certain hours, and in some cloisters, a bell would toll not to summon words, but to remind of silence. Picture a tower rising above rooftops, its bell heavy and patient. When it moves, the sound floods every street. Yet behind that sound lies law, shaping when and why it may sing. Section 100. Laws of windows and air even. The openings in one's home could be ruled. In narrow medieval streets, neighbors sometimes disputed over windows whether one household might peer into another's courtyard. Town laws often limited where windows could be placed, especially in crowded alleys. In some places, chimneys and smoke vents were likewise governed. A poorly built flue, spilling smoke into another's chamber, was a legal offense. To steal another's. Clean air was no small crime. Imagine a row of timber houses leaning close, their windows small, shutters creaking in the breeze. Behind them lie countless quiet agreements, all written in the ink of law. Section 101. Laws of bread once more. The baker's oath. We have spoken of bread before. but it deserves more. Bakers in medieval towns often swore public oaths to bake. Honestly, each loaf must match the price and weight declared by statute. To cheat the people was not only fraud, it was sin. Inspections were regular. Surprise visits by officials who carried balances and knives, cutting loaves to ensure even baking. Bakers guilty of deceit might be set upon the pillory, with false bread displayed for shame. Picture the scent of warm loaves, golden crusts stacked high, the murmur of a crowd. Beneath the comfort of bread lies vigilance, measured carefully by law. Section 102. Laws of inns and taverns. Travelers found refuge in inns, but those houses of rest were tightly regulated. Innkeepers were ordered to provide fair prices, honest measures of ale, and clean bedding. Some towns forbade more than a certain number of strangers in one room, fearing theft or disorder. Taverns, too, carried rules. No gambling after curfew, no serving wine too diluted, no staying open past the ringing of the evening bell. Ale tasters. A real office, wandered streets, sampling brews to ensure they met the standard. Picture a tavern's glow spilling onto cobblestones, laughter mingling with lute music. Yet behind the laughter stands parchment, seals, and watchful eyes of law. Section 103, Laws of Hunting and Forest. Shadow's forests belonged not to all, but to kings and lords. Royal forest law was fierce. Peasants might not hunt deer nor cut timber freely. Even owning a bow near the king's forest was cause for suspicion. To take game unlawfully could bring whipping, mutilation, or exile. Yet allowances existed. Poor folk might gather firewood, nuts, and berries, a practice called estovers. These, too, were defined by law, lest privilege stretch too far. Picture a green wood at dawn, birds rising in the mist, a deer stepping softly among the ferns. For some, it is beauty. For others, forbidden treasure. Between them lies the sharp line of law. Section 104. Laws of washhouses and rivers were lifelines, yet their use was bound by rule. In many towns, laundresses were ordered to wash clothes at specific places, downstream from where water was drawn for drinking. Tanneries and dye houses, whose work was foul-smelling and polluting, were often confined to the edges of towns, their waste forbidden from tainting wells. Washhouses themselves were sometimes public property, with rules about who might use them, when. Picture the river flowing gently, a washhouse standing upon its bank. Women laugh softly as they scrub linen against boards, splashes bright in the sunlight. The water runs clear because law, unseen, has guided its course. Section 105. Laws of healers and herb wives' medicine. In the Middle Ages mixed wisdom and suspicion. Licensed physicians, often educated in universities, were protected by statute. But village healers, who worked with herbs and charms, walked a narrower path. Some towns allowed them, others accused them of witchcraft. Laws varied widely, sometimes blessing their work, sometimes forbidding it outright. Pharmacists or apothecaries, too, were bound by law. They must sell herbs honestly, not diluted with weeds. Certain plants, considered dangerous or magical, were restricted altogether. Picture a small shop smelling of rosemary and sage, jars lined neatly along a wooden shelf. Each plant whispers, cure or curse, and law decides which name it bears. Section 106. Laws of bridges and crossing bridges were precious, and laws guarded their use. Some bridges collected tolls, legal fees for crossing. Others were free bridges, maintained by towns or monasteries as acts of charity. To damage a bridge, or to block its way, was a serious offense. In certain towns, travelers were forbidden to loiter upon bridges, lest they crowd the flow of carts and horses. Markets, too, were sometimes banned from bridges, though people loved to gather there. Picture a stone arch rising above a silver river, footsteps echoing as carts roll slowly across. The bridge feels timeless, but each stone is held firm by law. Section 107. Laws of fountains and public gifts. Public fountains, often built as acts of generosity, were protected by ordinance. Some towns forbade washing clothes in them, just as with wells. Others required that travelers be allowed to drink freely without charge. To deny water was to deny life. Guilds sometimes donated fountains, and their names were carved in stone. Laws ensured their gifts would remain pure, not stolen or defiled. Picture a marble basin, cool water spilling gently, catching light like liquid glass. A passerby cups their hands, drinks deeply, sighs. Behind that sigh rests the kindness and the law of centuries. Section 108. Laws of lanterns and watchmen. Night watchmen patrolled darkened streets, lanterns in hand. Some towns required households to hang lanterns outside after sunset, lighting alleys for safety. To neglect this could bring a fine. Watchmen themselves carried authority, empowered by law to question late-night wanderers. In Paris, ordinances demanded that whole districts be lit during certain festivals, turning night into glowing day. Picture the hush of midnight, a watchman's lantern glowing like a small sun. Its circle of light slides along cobblestones, revealing both safety and the weight of law. Section 109. Laws of carpets and households. In wealthier towns, carpets were imported luxuries, woven far away. Some statutes restricted their use, reserving them for noble houses. To walk upon richly dyed fabric was seen as excess, and sumptuary laws sought to limit it. Household furnishings, too, could be regulated. The number of silver plates, the type of wood allowed in chests, even the use of featherbeds. Too much softness was frowned upon in certain decrees. Picture a chamber lit by fire, a carpet rich with patterns spreading across the floor. Each thread, each color, is not only craft, it is privilege guarded by law. Section 110. Laws of time. And calendar's time itself was subject to law. The church set holy days, forbidding work upon them. Markets closed, plows stood idle, bells marked sacred hours. Kings and councils sometimes added their own festivals, binding time with decree. Calendars varied. Some towns began the new year at Christmas, others at Easter, others still at March. Laws defined these shifts, anchoring the river of time to civic needs. Picture a parchment calendar, months inked in red and black, saints' days marked with crosses. To turn its page is not only to pass time, it is to obey law. The room grows softer still. Outside, perhaps a faint wind stirs, brushing leaves together like parchment pages whispering secrets. Within, the candle's flame tilts and steadies, a patient companion to our wandering thoughts. You are safe. You are warm, and the night listens kindly. And so, let us step once more into the hidden corridors of medieval law. Section 99. Laws of bells and silence bells were the heartbeat of a medieval town. Yet their ringing was carefully controlled. Church bells signaled hours, prayers, and alarms, but laws often forbade their use at night, unless for fire or invasion. Unauthorized ringing could bring fines, for bells carried both sacred and civic meaning. In monasteries, silence itself was bound by rule. Monks might only speak at certain hours, and in some cloisters, a bell would toll not to summon words, but to remind of silence. Picture a tower rising above rooftops, its bell heavy and patient. When it moves, the sound floods every street, yet behind that sound lies law, shaping when and why it may sing. Section 100. Laws of windows and air even. The openings in one's home could be ruled. In narrow medieval streets, neighbors sometimes disputed over windows, whether one household might peer into another's courtyard. Town laws often limited where windows could be placed, especially in crowded alleys. In some places, chimneys and smoke vents were likewise governed. A poorly built flue spilling smoke into another's chamber was a legal offense. To steal another's clean air was no small crime. Imagine a row of timber houses leaning close, their windows small, shutters creaking in the breeze. Behind them lie countless quiet agreements, all written in the ink of law. Section 101. Laws of Bread once more. The Baker's Oath. We have spoken of bread before, but it deserves more. Bakers in medieval towns often swore public oaths to bake. Honestly, each loaf must match the price and weight declared by statute. To cheat the people was not only fraud, it was sin. Inspections were regular. Surprise visits by officials who carried balances and knives, cutting loaves to ensure even baking. Bakers guilty of deceit might be set upon the pillory with false bread displayed for shame. Picture the scent of warm loaves, golden crusts stacked high, the murmur of a crowd. Beneath the comfort of bread lies vigilance, measured carefully by law. Section 102. Laws of inns and taverns. Travelers found refuge in inns, but those houses of rest were tightly regulated. Innkeepers were ordered to provide fair prices, honest measures of ale, and clean bedding. Some towns forbade more than a certain number of strangers in one room, fearing theft or disorder. Taverns, too, carried rules. No gambling after curfew, no serving wine too diluted, no staying open past the ringing of the evening bell. Ale tasters, a real office, wandered streets, sampling brews to ensure they met the standard. Picture a tavern's glow spilling onto cobblestones, laughter mingling with lute music. Yet behind the laughter stands parchment, seals, and watchful eyes of law. Section 103. Laws of Hunting and Forest. Shadows, forests belonged not to all, but to kings and lords. Royal forest law was fierce. Peasants might not hunt deer, nor cut timber, freely. Even owning a bow near the king's forest was cause for suspicion. To take game unlawfully could bring whipping, mutilation, or exile, yet allowances existed. Poor folk might gather firewood, nuts, and berries, a practice called estovers. These, too, were defined by law, lest privilege stretch too far. Picture: a green wood at dawn, birds rising in the mist, a deer stepping softly among the ferns. For some, it is beauty. For others, forbidden treasure. Between them lies the sharp line of law. Section 104. Laws of washhouses and rivers. Rivers were lifelines, yet their use was bound by rule. In many towns, laundresses were ordered to wash clothes at specific places, downstream from where water was drawn for drinking. Tanneries and dye houses, whose work was foul-smelling and polluting, were often confined to the edges of towns, their waste forbidden from tainting wells. Washhouses themselves were sometimes public property, with rules about who might use them. When picture the river flowing gently, a washhouse standing upon its bank. Women laugh softly as they scrub linen against boards, splashes bright in the sunlight. The water runs clear because law, unseen, has guided its course. Section 105. Laws of healers and herb wives' medicine in the Middle Ages mixed wisdom and suspicion. Licensed physicians, often educated in universities, were protected by statute. But village healers, who worked with herbs and charms, walked a narrower path. Some towns allowed them, others accused them of witchcraft. Laws varied widely, sometimes blessing their work, sometimes forbidding it outright. Pharmacists, or apothecaries, too, were bound by law. They must sell herbs honestly, not diluted with weeds. Certain plants, considered dangerous or magical, were restricted altogether. Picture a small shop smelling of rosemary and sage, jars lined neatly along a wooden shelf. Each plant whispers cure or curse, and law decides which name it bears. Section 106. Laws of bridges and crossing bridges were precious, and laws guarded their use. Some bridges collected tolls, legal fees for crossing. Others were free bridges, maintained by towns or monasteries as acts of charity. To damage a bridge, or to block its way, was a serious offense. In certain towns, travelers were forbidden to loiter upon bridges, lest they crowd the flow of carts and horses. Markets, too, were sometimes banned from bridges, though people loved to gather there. Picture a stone arch rising above a silver river, footsteps echoing as carts roll slowly across. The bridge feels timeless, but each stone is held firm by law. Section 107. Laws of fountains and public gifts. Public fountains, often built as acts of generosity, were protected by ordinance. Some towns forbade washing clothes in them, just as with wells. Others required that travelers be allowed to drink freely without charge. To deny water was to deny life. Guilds sometimes donated fountains, and their names were carved in stone. Laws ensured their gifts would remain pure, not stolen or defiled. Picture a marble basin, cool water spilling gently, catching light like liquid glass. A passerby cups their hands, drinks deeply, sighs. Behind that sigh rests the kindness and the law of centuries. Section 108. Laws of lanterns and watchmen. Night watchmen patrolled darkened streets, lanterns in hand. Some towns required households to hang lanterns outside after sunset, lighting alleys for safety. To neglect this could bring a fine. Watchmen themselves carried authority, empowered by law to question late-night wanderers. In Paris, ordinances demanded that whole districts be lit during certain festivals, turning night into glowing day. Picture the hush of midnight, a watchman's lantern glowing like a small sun. Its circle of light slides along cobblestones, revealing both safety and the weight of law. Section 109. Laws of carpets and households. In wealthier towns, carpets were imported luxuries, woven far away. Some statutes restricted their use, reserving them for noble houses. To walk upon richly dyed fabric was seen as excess, and sumptuary laws sought to limit it. Household furnishings, too, could be regulated. The number of silver plates, the type of wood allowed in chests, even the use of feather beds. Too much softness was frowned upon in certain decrees. Picture a chamber lit by fire, a carpet rich with patterns spreading across the floor. Each thread, each color is not only craft, it is privilege guarded by law. Section 110. Laws of time. And calendar's time itself was subject to law. The church set holy days, forbidding work upon them. Markets closed, plows stood idle, bells marked sacred hours. Kings and councils sometimes added their own festivals, binding time with decree. Calendars varied. Some towns began the new year at Christmas, others at Easter, others still at March. Laws defined these shifts, anchoring the river of time to civic needs. Picture a parchment calendar, months inked in red and black, saints' days marked with crosses. To turn its page is not only to pass time, it is to obey law. Breathe slowly, dear listener. The night is quiet and the air cool. Imagine soft curtains stirring at an open window, a silver moon spilling light upon stone walls. The hush of the hour is deep, like velvet wrapping around your shoulders. Now, let us drift again into the winding paths of history. Section 125. Laws of chimneys and smokehouses. With chimneys were a sign of growing wealth in later centuries, yet their smoke was sometimes regulated. In certain towns, laws forbade chimneys that smoked too heavily, for fear they might kindle fires in neighboring thatch. Others required chimneys to be tall enough that sparks could not fall upon nearby roofs. Picture the hearth fire glowing, a curl of smoke rising skyward. Even this most homely of comforts was drawn into the web of law. Section 126. Laws of inns and lodging travelers needed shelter, and so laws shaped the inns of Europe. Innkeepers were required to offer fair prices, to provide fresh straw for bedding, and to keep ale measured honestly. Some towns demanded that innkeepers accept all lawful travelers, forbidding them from refusing guests without cause. Picture the creak of a wooden sign swaying in the night wind, an inn door opening with warm light spilling into the road. Behind, its welcome lies statute and ordinance, unseen yet firm. Section 127. Laws of cats and churchyards. Cats were beloved, feared, and woven into law. Some parishes kept statutes that cats must be allowed to dwell in churchyards, guarding grain stores from mice. Yet elsewhere, cats were bound by darker law, burned in festivals, or forbidden as creatures linked to witchcraft. Picture a cat weaving between gravestones, its eyes glowing faintly in moonlight. The silence of the yard is deep, yet even the cat's steps fall upon paths marked by law. Section 128. Laws of graveyards and bells burial was sacred and thus regulated with care. In many towns, it was illegal to bury the dead outside consecrated ground. Laws dictated where graves might be dug, how deep, and whether wooden markers or stone slabs were allowed. Church bells, too, were bound by ordinance. Some regions declared how often they might toll for funerals, for weddings, for curfews. Picture a bell swinging in slow arcs, its sound rolling across the valley. Each note, though mournful or joyous, is guided by law. Section 129. Laws of fishermen and rivers teemed with fish, yet rights to them were tangled in law. Only lords or monasteries might claim entire stretches of water. Weirs and nets were restricted, so that fish might not be overcaught. Some towns even forbade catching sturgeon, those great armored fish, reserving them as royal delicacies. Picture moonlight on a river's ripples, nets cast in silence, a catch glimmering silver. Yet beneath the surface swims law, invisible as current. Section 130. Laws of gardens and herbs gardens, too, were touched by statute. Some towns forbade the growing of poisonous herbs, fearing they might be used for ill. Others demanded that apothecaries list and price each herb publicly. Monasteries often claimed exclusive rights to certain medicinal plants. Picture rows of sage and rosemary, dew glistening upon their leaves, bees hovering lazily above blossoms. Yet even the stillness of a garden is bounded by law. Section 131. Laws of bells and night watches. The bell was the heartbeat of the medieval town. Curfew bells marked when fires must be extinguished and doors closed. Laws demanded each town keep a watchman, patrolling the streets after the bells toll, lantern in hand. Some places required householders to answer the watch's call, joining in alarm if thieves or fires were spotted. Picture narrow streets, cloaked in shadow, a single watchman's lantern swaying with his step. His voice echoes faintly. All's well. The night itself is patrolled by law. Section 132. Laws of bread size and weight. We spoke of baker's rules, yet the loaves themselves bore laws more intricate still. The assize of bread and ale in England decreed exact weights for each loaf, tied to the price of wheat. A loaf too small could bring punishment, yet a loaf too large was rare. Better to give more than to risk the stocks. Picture a row of round loaves cooling on wooden shelves, the smell rich and comforting. Their weight is not only grain and water, it is statute baked into crust. Section 133. Laws of swine and markets pigs roamed freely in many medieval towns, rooting in refuse, but laws kept their numbers checked. In some places, pigs were required to wear wooden collars or sticks across their necks so they could not squeeze into narrow lanes and topple stalls. Uncollared pigs might be seized or even slaughtered by town officials. Picture the grunt of swine in a cobbled street, a snout, nudging at scraps. Its oaken collar clinks softly, an ordinary sound, yet the echo of law. Section 134. Laws of wine and taverns wine flowed from casks, yet was never free of regulation. Taverns were required to measure each cup carefully, sometimes under the watch of sworn tasters. To water down wine was fraud, punished by fines or whipping. In some towns, laws forbade the sale of foreign wine before local vintages were consumed, protecting native trade. Picture a candle-lit tavern, the glimmer of red in a wooden cup. The warmth spreads as you drink, yet the flow of the liquid has been guided by statute. Section 135. Laws of foreigners in market strangers brought goods and stories, yet their place in markets was defined by law. Foreign merchants might be forbidden to sell directly, forced instead to pass their wares through local guilds. Some were allowed only to trade for a set number of days, after which they must depart. Picture a merchant from distant shores, laying out silks or spices beneath a striped awning. Around him swirl voices of barter, yet invisible rules frame his every sale. Section 136. Laws of bridges and crossing. These bridges connected more than lands, they connected laws. Many bridges charged tolls, with laws fixing the price of passage. Exemptions were sometimes given to monks, soldiers, or pilgrims. To evade the toll was theft, punishable in court. Picture the sound of hooves on wooden planks, the flow of water rushing below. A toll keeper's hand extends, palm open. Each crossing is a contract of law. Section 137. Laws of apprenticeship. Years. The journey of a craftsman began with years of apprenticeship. By law, an apprentice might serve 7 years, sometimes more, before being freed to work as a journeyman. Contracts bound them to obedience, while masters were required to provide food, lodging, and training. To break apprenticeship was breach of law, binding both families and guilds to courts. Picture a young boy sweeping a workshop floor, tools gleaming in racks upon the wall. His hands long to shape wood or iron, yet his path is written in statute. Section 138. Laws of firewood and gathering in forests near towns. Gathering wood was tightly controlled. Some laws allowed peasants to collect fallen branches, but forbade cutting green wood. Others taxed the very bundles of sticks carried home. To steal timber from a lord's forest was grave offense, punishable even by death. Picture a villager trudging home, bundle of twigs bound upon his back. Each step is heavy, each branch permitted by law. Section 139. Laws of alehouses and hours alehouses offered cheer, yet their hours were often bound by statute. Some towns required them to close at curfew, forbidding late-night drinking. Others demanded that ale be brewed only by licensed women, alewives, whose names were recorded in rolls. Ale was both comfort and danger, and so law hovered above the froth. Picture mugs clinking upon wooden tables, laughter echoing in smoky rafters. The joy is warm, yet a watchful law lingers in the corner. Section 140. Laws of torches in processions festivals filled the streets with flame, yet fire was peril. Thus, processions bearing torches were regulated, sometimes permitted only with escorts or restricted to certain routes. To drop a torch carelessly could bring heavy fines. Picture a night parade, torches lifting high, faces glowing golden against the dark. Each flicker is joy, yet each flame belongs to law. Close your eyes for a moment, dear listener. Feel the hush of the night surrounding you. Imagine the faint glow of embers in a hearth, their warmth pulsing softly into the cool air. Outside, a wind drifts across the rooftops, and the world grows, still, as if waiting for another tale to unfold. And so, once more, let us step quietly into the labyrinth of forgotten laws. Section 141. Laws of Candlelight and Darkness. In many towns, it was forbidden to walk the streets at night without a fire, lantern, or candle. The fear of thieves or fires sparked by carelessness lay behind such decrees. Picture a villager cradling a small flame in cupped hands, the wax dripping slowly, the shadows pulling back with each step. Even in darkness, law guided the glow. Section 142. Laws of dung heaps and waste rubbish too was bound by ordinance. Towns demanded that dung heaps be kept outside the gates or in special corners of the market square. To tip refuse into a street was unlawful, and neighbors might bring complaints before the court. Picture the clatter of cartwheels bearing waste, the sharp scent in the night air. Even filth itself was subject to law. Section 143. Laws of Carving Meat. At feasts, carving was not left to chance. In certain noble courts, only officials trained and licensed might carve meat before guests. It was seen as both art and order. To cut clumsily was a breach not merely of etiquette, but of custom backed by law. Picture the gleam of a blade slicing tender roast, the hush of guests watching. Each stroke is precise, guided by rules older than memory. Section 144. Laws of Minstrels and Storytellers. Even music and story were shaped by decree. Some towns allowed only licensed minstrels to perform in public squares. Wandering bards who lacked approval might be driven away or fined for their songs. Picture the pluck of a lute string, the soft rise of a voice weaving tales into the night air. Yet each note, each word, is shadowed by law. Section 145. Laws of. Women's hair and veils modesty was enforced with strange exactness. In certain places, women were required by law to cover their hair in public after marriage. A fine might be levied against those who left their heads bare, for it was seen as unseemly. Picture a market square, a gentle breeze stirring cloth, veils shifting like wings. Even the sway of fabric obeys decree. Section 146. Laws of Bread for. The poor charity itself was commanded by law. Some towns required bakers to provide a set number of loaves each week for the hungry, given at the church door. Elsewhere, wealthy citizens were bound by statute to sponsor alms, ensuring no beggar went unfed during holy days. Picture the warmth of bread in an open hand, steam rising in the morning chill. The gift is mercy, yet also mandate. Section 147. Laws of Hunting. Songs hunts were accompanied by horns and chants, but even these sounds had their rules. To blow a hunting horn falsely, outside the presence of game, could be punished as deception. Some forests forbade the singing of hunting songs by common folk, keeping the joy of the chase as a noble's privilege. Picture the echo of a horn rolling through trees, the call clear and wild. But to sound it wrongly was crime. Section 148. Laws of shoes and heels fashion was not free. Sumptuary laws declared what shoes might be worn and how long the pointed toes might extend. Some towns limited the size of heels, deeming them dangerous upon cobbles. Picture a row of leather shoes, drying by a fire, toes curled upward in style, soles smelling faintly of tanned hide. Even the tread of one's step was subject to law. Section 149. Laws of Carriers and Messengers. Messages carried across lands were guarded by regulation. Some towns required messengers to swear oaths of secrecy. Others declared that letters must be stamped or sealed with official marks, their authenticity protected by law. Picture the gallop of a horse across fields, a satchel bouncing at its rider's side. Within lies not only ink on parchment, but the weight of decree. Section 150. Laws of dogs in the hunt. Not all dogs could chase deer. In certain forests, commoners were permitted dogs only if their claws were cut short, so they could not run swiftly after game. This trimming, called lawing, was enforced by inspectors who visited villages to check each hound. Picture a dog resting by a fire, its paws worn yet loyal. Even its nails bear the mark of law. Section 151. Laws of oaths in court. Truth itself was bound by ritual. To speak in court, a man or woman swore oaths upon relics or holy texts. False oath-taking was perjury, punishable by loss of property or, worse, picture a trembling hand laid upon carved wood, the air thick with silence. Words spoken here carried the weight of eternity. Section 152. Laws of spices and trade exotic spices were treasures and thus regulated. Pepper, saffron, and cinnamon were sometimes taxed at extraordinary rates, their price doubled or tripled by decree. In markets, statutes forbade mixing sawdust or cheap herbs into costly spice powders. Picture the gleam of saffron threads in morning light, golden and rare. Each pinch is fragrant with law. Section 153. Laws of fountains and wells water, source of life, was guarded by law. Many towns forbade washing clothes in fountains or watering animals in wells. To throw refuse into a spring was a grave crime, punished with heavy fines. Picture a stone well at dawn, buckets lowering with soft splashes. The surface shimmers with sky, kept pure by decree. Section 154. Laws of pilgrims' badges. Pilgrims bore badges of lead or pewter, tokens of the shrines they visited. Laws required these badges to be worn openly, proof of journey and devotion. To forge a badge was crime, an insult to both shrine and saint. Picture a cloak pinned with small shining emblems, each a story of miles walked. The clink of metal is prayer, but also ordinance. Section 155. Laws of meatless days religion wove deeply into law. Statutes demanded abstinence from meat on Fridays and during Lent. In some kingdoms, fishmongers thrived under these rules. Their trade, protected by faith, turned to statute. Picture the scent of salted cod, hung in long rows, drying in cool air. Its taste is both devotion and decree. Section 156. Laws of bells and storms. It was once believed that the sound of church bells could drive away storms. Thus, some towns required bells to be rung when thunder rolled. The law, in this case, was woven from superstition, binding heaven to earth through bronze. Picture a storm cloud swelling above rooftops, a sudden peal ringing across the sky. The sound trembles with hope and with law. Section 157. Laws of barbers and bloodletting barbers were healers as well as groomers, and their practice was shaped by statute. Some towns forbade barbers from performing surgery beyond bloodletting and tooth-pulling. Others demanded licenses for their craft, inspected by guild officials. Picture a small shop, a razor gleaming in candlelight, a basin set below. The hum of blades is low, steady, bound by law. Section 158. Laws of bells for stray animals. In some villages, animals without owners were marked by bells. Cows, goats, or sheep that wandered free might be required by law to wear a clinking bell so that their presence could be traced. Stray animals without bells could be seized as property of the town. Picture a meadow at dusk, the soft chime of bells mingling with crickets. Even wandering creatures carried the music of law. Section 159. Laws of children and apprentices, childhood. Itself was shaped by statutes. Some towns forbade children under 12 from working in certain trades. Others demanded that every boy learn an occupation by a set age, so none would fall into idleness. Picture children playing beside a workshop, their laughter bright against stone walls. Yet their futures are already scripted by law. Section 160. Laws of seals and ring seals were the signatures of the medieval world. Laws required contracts to be stamped with wax and pressed by ring or seal. To break another seal was high crime, a theft of both trust and authority. Picture the warm press of a ring into soft wax, leaving a crest clear and proud. The circle hardens, carrying the weight of law. Let your body soften, dear listener. The night has grown darker, yet warmer. Imagine yourself by the embers of a fire, their glow flickering gently across carved beams above. The faint scent of smoke lingers, mingling with herbs hung to dry in the rafters. Outside, a distant owl calls into the stillness, and so once more we step together into the quiet corridors of medieval law. Section 161. Laws of inns and taverns travelers were bound to certain rules when lodging in towns. Innkeepers were often required by law to keep a guest book of sorts, recording the names of those who stayed beneath their roofs. Some towns forbade the serving of strong drink after curfew bells, while others demanded that inns provide clean straw for bedding. Picture a wooden inn, its door creaking open, the warmth of ale and stew drifting outward. Yet behind the laughter and clatter lies the steady hand of statute. Section 162. Laws of beggars begging, too, was not left ungoverned. Some cities allowed only licensed beggars to ask alms in certain streets, while others decreed that beggars must wear special tokens or cloaks. To beg outside assigned places was punishable by fine or whipping. Picture a cold stone street, a hand stretched out, a coin falling with a soft clink. Even mercy itself was hedged with law. Section 163. Laws of market weights. Merchants were carefully watched. Scales were to be inspected weekly and weights marked with official seals. To falsify them was theft in the eyes of law, punished harshly. In some markets, even the baskets used for measuring grain were chained in place, so none could secretly be swapped. Picture the rustle of wheat pouring into a wooden measure, the soft slide of scales balancing. Justice itself is measured in grains. Section 164. Laws of pigs and the streets. Pigs roamed freely in many towns, feeding on scraps. Yet their liberty was checked by law. Some towns required pigs to wear wooden yokes around their necks, so they could not push into doorways or overturn stalls. Others fined owners whose pigs trampled gardens or attacked children. Picture a bristly pig trotting down a lane, its wooden collar clacking softly with each step. Even this creature carries the burden of decree. Section 165. Laws of bridges and toll crossing rivers was rarely free. Lords or towns might demand tolls for each cart, horse, or even person who passed over a bridge. Laws declared the exact coin, and to evade payment was theft. Picture the creak of planks beneath wagon wheels, the glitter of coins dropped into a toll chest. Each crossing is both passage and payment. Section 166. Laws of fires at night, the danger of flames haunted medieval towns. In many places, laws demanded that all household fires be covered at night, smothered beneath ash or banked safely. The curfew bell, whose name comes from couvre-feu, cover fire, was the signal. Picture the glow of embers dimming, the hush of a room settling into darkness. Even fire itself must bow to law. Section 167. Laws of nobles' colors, sumptuary. Rules declared which colors could be worn. Rich shades, scarlet, purple, deep blue, were sometimes reserved for nobles, their brilliance forbidden to common folk. To wear them unlawfully risked confiscation of garments or heavy fines. Picture the sweep of a velvet cloak shimmering in torchlight, its hue radiant and bold. Yet even a color may belong to law. Section 168. Laws of fishermen, rivers were lifelines, and thus guarded. Some laws forbade fishing with nets that spanned an entire river so that fish stocks might endure. Others declared that salmon taken before a certain season must be thrown back, even if caught. Picture the splash of water against a boat, the tug of a net heavy with silver forms. Each catch is a gift, but only within law. Section 169. Laws of marriage feasts. Weddings, too, had limits. In some places, laws capped the number of guests, the amount of food, or even the kinds of dishes served to prevent excess. A family who offered more than allowed might be fined for their generosity. Picture a long table glowing with candles, bread, and meat spread wide. Yet, unseen, the count of guests and courses ticks against law's measure. Section 170. Laws of bakers. Ovens. In certain towns, private ovens were forbidden. All bread was to be baked in the Lord's oven for a fee. Those who defied this, baking secretly at home, risked penalty or loss of bread. Picture smoke rising from a great communal oven, loaves stacked high, golden crusts steaming. The warmth of each loaf is shared, yet bound by decree. Section 171. Laws of bells. For time before clocks, bells kept order. Laws decreed the ringing of bells to mark hours, to summon laborers, to signal curfew. To fail to ring at the appointed time was a punishable neglect of duty. Picture a tower against pale sky, a great rope swinging, the bronze voice echoing far. Time itself was called into being by law. Section 172. Laws of falconry. Falcons were marks of prestige, and thus restricted. In some kingdoms, only nobles of certain rank might keep hawks of particular breeds. To poach a falcon or train one unlawfully was grave offense. Picture a falcon perched upon a gloved hand, feathers gleaming, eyes sharp as flame. Its cry pierces the air, tethered by ribbon and by statute. Section 173. Laws of alewives. Women who brewed and sold ale, the alewives, were often subject to inspection. Ale conners, as they were called, tested the strength of drink, ensuring it was neither too weak nor deceitfully watered. Those who sold poor ale risked public shame, fines, or even being placed in the stocks. Picture frothy mugs set upon a wooden table, the air rich with malt. Each swallow is both refreshment and regulation. Section 174. Laws of mills. Like ovens, mills were controlled by lords. Grain had to be ground at the lord's mill, with a portion kept as payment. To grind secretly at home, or with a hand mill, was forbidden. Picture the turning of a great wooden wheel, water rushing against its paddles, the deep groan of stone against grain. Flour drifts in the air, perfumed with law. Section 175. Laws of bells for lost children. In some villages, if a child went missing, the church bell was rung in a special pattern. This was law, binding the community to search until the child was found. To ignore such a call was not only cruel, but unlawful. Picture the echoing ring across fields, the hurried steps of neighbors gathering lanterns. Even the cry of the bell is duty under law. Section 176. Laws of Sunday rest Sabbath. Laws forbade work upon Sundays and holy days. Markets closed, forges cooled, tools lay still. To labor openly was a sin made into statute. Picture a silent village. At dawn, smoke absent from chimneys, the hush of rest blanketing all. Even idleness itself was required by law. Section 177. Laws of butchers. Butchers were watched closely. Laws dictated where animals could be slaughtered, often at town edges, lest blood defile sacred streets. Meat had to be inspected for sickness before sale. Picture a block wet with fresh cuts, the sharp tang of iron in the air. Each slice is carried out under law's gaze. Section 178. Laws of carts on roads. Roads, fragile and few, were guarded by regulation. Some towns forbade heavy carts during winter lest they break rutted tracks. Others ordered carts to use iron-bound. Wheels only in certain seasons. Picture the creak of a laden cart, its wheels grinding over stone. Even the journey of goods was timed by law. Section 179, laws of schoolmasters' learning, too, fell under statutes. Schoolmasters often required licenses, issued by bishops or guilds. To teach without approval risked punishment, for knowledge was as precious as coin. Picture a wooden hall echoing with recited Latin, the scratch of quills upon parchment. Each lesson is a gift, yet governed by decree. Section 180. Laws of processions, religious. Processions were choreographed by ordinance. Citizens were told where to stand, what to carry, and in what order to march. To disrupt or alter a procession was an insult to both church and town. Picture the slow sway of banners, incense drifting. In the air, the rhythm of feet upon cobbles. The sacred path is also a legal one.